This is the story of how a NEET, not in education, employment, or training, becomes the god of fate, saves some villagers, and is saved in return. 1 month earlier, the unshaven young man was eating at his parents' house while his mother asked if he had found a job yet. She pointed out that his father couldn't work forever, and though they were fine for now, she worried about what he would do if they passed away. He put his spoon down, angrily slammed his fist on the table, and told her he knew. Then he rudely told her to shut up when she continued to scold him for doing nothing. In his mind, he wished she would stop lecturing. After finishing his meal, the young man sighed at having to wake up so early. Suddenly, he stood up from the table saying he didn't want to eat anymore and left, leaving his food untouched. He was aware that he was doing something terrible. After graduating from high school, he had enrolled in and graduated from a run-of-the-mill university that anyone could get into. Those days weren't exactly bad, but the real problem started after graduation. Before, he had tried his best in his job search, but no matter how hard he tried, he was rejected by every company he applied to. Gradually, as he continued to fail, his motivation disappeared. While his friends and classmates moved forward with their lives, time just kept passing. Year after year since his graduation until a decade had gone by. His mother talked about acquaintances who had gotten far in life, while he was still a bum in his 30s. But he was well aware that many of his classmates had stable jobs and had even started families, while he was still stuck in the same place. His thoughts were interrupted as he was halfway up the stairs by the sound of the doorbell. Looking through the intercom screen, he saw a delivery person holding a package with a strange logo and decided to get the door himself. His mother worried that he had bought something, even though he had no money, but he denied it, saying he might have won a prize or something similar. To forget the guilt of not working, he had entered every email sweepstakes he came across. Sometimes he won products, and a few of them were adult items, so he had to get them before his parents saw. Stepping out of the house, he signed for the package, noticing the delivery person's surprised look. He guessed it was probably because he saw a man at home in the middle of a weekday. He also noticed his neighbors staring at him more and more openly, to the point where he had gotten used to it. As he held the package, his mother made a teasing remark and then left him alone in his room. Opening the box, he found a blank game disc titled The Village of Fate. He believed this might be an alpha test, and the enclosed paper confirmed that he had been selected for the alpha test of a game using the latest technology, boasting characters with near-human behavior. It was the first game of its kind. In the game, he would be the god of fate, who would give instructions to the villagers each day to develop their village, and would learn more about other mechanics as the game progressed. Yoshio found this rather sloppy and guessed it was a village-building game. The paper asked him not to disclose any details related to the game to anyone, nor to post about it online. If he broke his promise, his right to play the game would be revoked and the game would be confiscated. He was quite surprised the company didn't make him sign a contract and wondered how they could know if someone posted information online. The paper also required him to always play while connected to the internet, warning that he would not be able to play again if his village was destroyed in the game, and revealed that since the game had an autosave feature, reloading from a previous save was impossible. Yoshio found the terms too harsh, thinking such a requirement was impossible. He hesitated on whether to install the game and went online to search for it but found no information. Fearing the game might be full of viruses, he decided to try it on his old computer, thinking it might just be a low-quality game or a prank. Since he spent his days gaming and browsing the internet anyway, he finally agreed, planning to post about his experience if he got scammed. The game started with a simple title screen, which Yoshio thought was pretty bad. However, when he pressed enter, Yoshio's eyes widened in amazement. He saw a carriage speeding through a forest with stunning graphics unlike anything he'd ever seen before. A warrior covered in scars drove the carriage, desperately trying to escape from two monsters chasing him, who were riding on the backs of wild boars. Yoshio saw a scene like something out of a medieval fantasy world, where a caravan was being hunted. The game showed the inside of the carriage, where a family was huddled together in fear, and a priestess clutching a Bible prayed to the god of fate to protect them. A monster swung its sword, slashing the side of the carriage model, causing everyone inside to scream in terror as the carriage was relentlessly attacked. One of the monsters charged forward, and Yoshio realized they were trying to hit the horses pulling the carriage. The warrior quickly saw this, drew his sword and parried the monster's attack. But another monster took this chance to strike at the horses before the warrior could react. Just then, the priestess's Bible began to glow brilliantly, blinding the monsters and forcing them to retreat. The warrior then checked on the passengers and they all smiled in relief, realizing they were safe. Yoshio realized the game had officially begun, wondering what his next move would be. When he clicked on the warrior, the character's bio information appeared, revealing him to be a 26-year-old warrior monk named Gams, and the brother of Kem, a 19-year-old priestess who worshipped the god of fate. Yoshio noted that Kem looked nothing like her brother. He wondered where this game was made, endlessly praising its insane graphics, but decided to save that investigation for later, checking the other characters' bios first. The remaining 3 characters were a family, consisting of Lotus, a 33-year-old former grocery store owner, his tough and strong 30-year-old wife Layla, and their 7-year-old daughter Carol, who was very mature for her age. Along with the 2 siblings, they were the game's main characters. Although Yoshio was enjoying watching the game, he was still unsure how to play. As he recalled the instructions, a chime sounded, indicating that the characters were speaking, and their dialogue appeared as text. Gams knelt and apologized for failing to protect their village, having only managed to get them to safety. Lotus told Gams to stand up, insisting that it was a miracle they had survived the monster attack. Carol asked about the blinding light, calling Gams Big Brother. However, Kem tensely reminded her that Gams was her brother. Yoshio remarked that Carol seemed to have a brother complex, and he identified the siblings as the main characters. Gams scolded his sister for her childish behavior, and Carol took the opportunity to tease them both. Seeing the well-developed settings and character personalities, Yoshio began to think this might be a good game. Layla intervened and stopped the girls' argument, then asked about the flash of light from earlier. Kem explained that the light came from her Bible. Another chime sounded, informing Yoshio that he would become their god and guide the village to prosperity, though he couldn't directly interfere in their lives. He could grant the villagers 1 prophecy a day through the Bible, 1 page at a time, and the game encouraged him to try it. Yoshio was surprised that he could write the commands himself instead of just choosing from a list of options, but he decided to worry about that later, believing they could only respond to simple commands. After a while, he proudly finished his godlike command, declaring that if the AI could understand even a fraction of it, he could confirm this was a god-tier game. He pressed enter to see how this supposedly top-tier technology would respond. The Bible began to glow once more, and a stunned Kem opened it. She fell to her knees and thanked the heavens for this miracle. She announced to everyone that she had received a prophecy from the god of fate, then showed the Bible to the astonished men. Lotus sobbed with devotion, while his wife and daughter apologized for being illiterate. Gams, though only partially literate himself, couldn't be of much help either. Gams asked his sister to read the prophecy aloud, and seeing everyone's expectant gazes, Kem prepared to read aloud. Yoshio, introducing himself as the god of fate, took credit for repelling the monsters with his miracle, promising to grant them 1 miracle each day from now on. He said his wish was for them to follow the prophecy and live peaceful lives, ordering them to cut down trees and prepare a place to live. Hearing his command being read aloud, Yoshio pushed his chair back in astonishment, seeing Layla rejoice that a god was watching over and protecting them. She gave thanks for the god's generosity in providing them with a daily command. Yoshio realized in amazement that the characters had understood everything he wrote and declared that this game's technology was far beyond its time. It was truly incredible. Yoshio was stunned to see the characters responding exactly to what he wrote. Although he thought they might just be following a pre-programmed sequence of actions, he still wondered what this game really was. After receiving the oracle, Kem asked everyone to split up to chop down trees. Lotus interjected, pointing out that even if they cut down the trees, they couldn't immediately use them as lumber, but would have to process and dry them first. Both Kem and Yoshio were surprised by this, with Yoshio realizing that the game's mechanics were more complex than he had imagined, far surpassing games like AoE 2. Lotus explained that raw wood must be dried before being processed into building lumber to avoid warping. Both Kem and Yoshio admitted they didn't know this. Lotus reasoned that the god, with his transcendent thinking, must have his own plan, and suggested they first cut down the trees and secure the quantity, which made the god feel very grateful. Lotus took some tools from the carriage, and while he and Gams were felling the trees, the girls went to search for food in the area. Yoshio realized he could scroll the mouse to zoom in and out of the scene, and upon seeing the narrow strip of land on the escape route, he confirmed that the visible area would expand as the characters explored new parts of the map. He wondered how time progressed in the game and whether it was in real time, realizing at the same time that creating such a game would be incredibly difficult. Just then, another notification popped up, stating that as the god of fate, he could use fate points to perform miracles. Fate points were points awarded in proportion to the villagers' level of gratitude towards him, and they were displayed in the top right corner of the screen, currently at 97. The more grateful the villagers were, the more his points would increase, and if he had more villagers, the amount of points earned would also increase. Fate points would rise the more indebted the villagers felt to him for his prophecies. Yoshio realized that his fate points would change based on the content of his prophecies, and the explanation concluded by emphasizing that if the village prospered and the population grew, the effectiveness of the miracles would also improve. He checked his miracle board, starting with events like the appearance of helpful people, such as a peddler, a traveling doctor, or a hunter, along with reuniting with villagers who had escaped, realizing he could manipulate people's destinies. He also saw many options related to the weather, but noted that he only had a limited number of points and wondered what to use them on. Yoshio decided to listen to the villagers and base his decisions on their needs. He eavesdropped on the conversation between Lotus and Gams as they were chopping trees. Lotus tried to start a conversation, praising the god of fate, talking about the weather and chem, but only received curt replies. Realizing this conversation was going nowhere, he switched to listening to the girls who were gathering food. When Layla asked, Kem revealed that they had brought enough provisions for 2 weeks. The priestess hoped that during that time they would find a stable food source. Yoshio considered choosing the peddler visit miracle so they could buy food from him. He deduced that to become self-sufficient in food, they would probably have to go into the mountains to search. Curious about what could be found up there, he considered sending Gams to scout the next day, but hesitated, fearing separating the only warrior from the group. If he were thinking purely about conquering the game objectively, he should use Carol, who had less of a vital role, to explore the area. However, upon seeing the little girl picking mushrooms, he realized that if his careless actions led to all of them being wiped out, the guilt would weigh heavily on his conscience. Continuing to look at the miracle board, he saw he could summon familiars, and deduced that he could use one to expand the visible area on the map. He saw over 50 types of creatures, including mystical species like slimes and unicorns, but he decided to choose a bird for reconnaissance. However, despite their good scouting abilities, all the familiars cost more points than he currently had. Even common creatures like cats or dogs were out of his reach. All he could afford was a chick, but while it could contribute to their food supply if it laid eggs, it was unsuitable for scouting. Yoshio was disappointed and realized the only way to earn more points was to make the villagers feel indebted to him. Just then, a chime rang out, announcing another method to increase fate points: a payment system. Welcome to the wonderful world of microtransactions. According to the guide, for every 1,000 yen he paid, he would get an additional 10 points. Yoshio held his head in frustration, realizing the game had implemented the most annoying payment system. Although having a payment system was normal, he was surprised to see it in an alpha test version. While he didn't have enough points to summon a familiar now, if he spent 20,000 yen, he could get a small cat or dog. Besides summoning creatures, the points could help him improve the villagers' lives. Quickly opening his drawer, Yoshio checked his savings and realized he had over 10,000 yen. He calculated that he could sell the books and games in his house to get more money. If you auctioned off the unopened prizes you've won, you could earn even more. After thinking about what needed to be done, Yoshio checked on the villagers. He saw them going to sleep in the carriage, even though it was only 9 p.m. Carol wished Gams a good night, but Kem interrupted and did the same. Gams remained by the fire outside the tent, despite Lotus advising him to rest. Gams calmly replied that someone had to keep watch, since no one knew when monsters might attack during the night. Lotus reassured him, pointing out that they had witnessed the miracles of the god of fate firsthand, and reasoned that since the god had given them prophecies, it meant the god of fate was watching over them. Although Lotus insisted that monsters wouldn't dare come near thanks to the god's power, Gams reluctantly accepted it. Yoshio silently apologized to the villagers because he didn't have that kind of power. He worried the villagers would think they were completely safe, believing the god could do anything. He wondered if he should tell them that he wasn't omnipotent and that his powers had limits. However, he hesitated, fearing it would diminish the villagers' gratitude towards him, causing him to stop receiving fate points. Putting that aside for later, Yoshio decided to research lumber production and looked up information online. While searching, he reflected on how many years it had been since he'd seriously studied anything. He had spent the past years just watching videos in his room or posting nonsense on Reddit. He told himself that if he had used that time more effectively, he might have been able to give the villagers more useful advice. Yoshio blamed himself, thinking that if he hadn't been a NEET from the start, he might have had enough money to increase his fate points. He also thought that if a normal working person were the player instead of him, the villagers would surely have a much easier life. He wondered why he was regretting his past over a game, when games were supposed to be for relaxation. Just then, he saw his own disheveled reflection in the window. He clutched his side in pain and lifted his shirt, revealing a deep scar on his abdomen. He realized the wound ached when it was cold, and recalled the terrible memory of how he got injured. Back then, a creepy stalker was harassing his younger sister, and he had confronted him, warning him to stay away from his sister, but got no response. Yoshio grabbed the stalker by the collar, demanding he promise to leave his sister alone. Just then, the stalker mumbled something unintelligible. Yoshio leaned in, surprised, as his sister screamed in terror. The stalker had stabbed him in the stomach with a switchblade. He pulled the knife out as Yoshio collapsed to the ground, a crazed smile on his face. In a panic, Yoshio screamed for help and ran away desperately, leaving a trail of blood behind him, abandoning his sister. Recalling that moment, Yoshio described it as the point when everything started to fall apart. From that day on, no matter what he did, nothing ever seemed to go right. He tried to push those thoughts out of his mind, realizing how far his life had gone downhill. Sitting in front of his computer again, surrounded by trash, Yoshio decided to immerse himself even further in the game, staring at the screen with a sad expression, and concluding that there was nothing else he could do. As the sun rose, the light pouring through the window woke Yoshio up. Looking at the clock, he realized it was already morning. He had stayed up all night researching lumber production and had fallen asleep without realizing it. Seeing it was only 7:05, he realized it had been a long time since he'd woken up this early. Returning to his computer, Yoshio checked on the villagers and saw that everyone was already awake. He saw Lotus and Gams preparing to chop down trees, while Kem was praying and Layla and her daughter were gathering herbs. He realized this was the kind of game where the villagers lived in real time. Wondering what prophecy he should bestow upon the villagers for the day, Yoshio's thoughts were interrupted when his stomach started to growl with hunger. He realized he had been so focused on the game the day before that he'd forgotten to eat dinner. And he had also finished all the snacks in his room. Heading downstairs, he wondered if there was anything left in the fridge, but he froze as he neared the closed kitchen door and heard his sister's voice asking their mom for soy sauce. Tense, Yoshio pressed himself against the wall, realizing it was breakfast time. His father told the family he might have to work overtime today, and his sister told their dad not to overdo it. Yoshio hadn't spoken directly to his sister since the incident with the stalker, nor had he spoken to his father after they had a huge fight about him finding a job. He imagined himself walking into the kitchen and asking for a plate of breakfast, but then dismissed the thought, telling himself it was ridiculous. Everyone was eating breakfast to prepare for a hard day's work, and he, the one without a job, couldn't possibly face them. Defeated and sad, Yoshio quietly returned to his room. He decided to work out. Ever since the incident, he had developed a habit of exercising, working out regularly in his room. That day, I ran away in fear, and I wanted to erase that weakness inside me by becoming stronger. When he heard the bell, Yoshio turned his attention to the game village of fate. There, Lotus was telling his daughter not to overwork herself, but the enthusiastic little girl continued, saying she wanted to help too. Lotus then told her to call him if she got into trouble or needed physical help, and Carol happily agreed. Watching this, Yoshio noted that, even though this was just a game, he realized the villagers seemed to be living more meaningful lives than he was. In a fit of depression, he stared at the screen and decided to warn them not to place too much hope in an incompetent god. As the new prophecy was delivered, the holy book glowed, and Kem breathlessly announced to everyone that they had just received a prophecy from the god of fate. Standing before the gathered villagers, Kem read the oracle. Yoshio informed them that he had currently lost half his power, and could only grant small miracles and watch over them as he had been. He expressed his sincere wish that they join forces with those around them to survive, and gave them his blessing. A silence fell as everyone took in the final oracle. Yoshio anxiously covered his face, wondering if they felt disappointed in a god who was just making excuses. He cursed himself, thinking he should have come up with a more convincing reason. However, he was pulled from his negative thoughts when Kem praised the miracle that their god was still watching over them. To his surprise, Lotus also expressed his gratitude, saying that the god's loss of power was likely because he was fighting demons, and concluded that they couldn't keep depending on their god forever. Lotus resolved that they must strengthen their own position even more. Yoshio was shocked to see his pessimistic words interpreted in a way that was favorable to him. He noticed that his fate points had increased, now reaching 110. Yoshio realized that the content of the prophecies determined the fate points he received. However, earning only 13 points in a single day made him doubt whether he could activate a beneficial miracle each week, and couldn't give the villagers an easy life. Eavesdropping on the girls' conversation, he heard Kem remark that sleeping in the carriage felt unnatural, and that they needed a wall or a fence to stop monster attacks. Layla, meanwhile, lamented the lack of salt. Yoshio realized he could ease some of the villagers' anxieties if he had more fate points, but he hesitated to waste his current ones. His only remaining option was to earn more points through the payment system. He put all his unopened lottery prizes up for auction, hoping to make around 20 to 30,000 yen. Looking at his collection of manga and old games, he figured he could make some quick cash if he sold them at a used bookstore. However, the problem was that selling them meant he had to go outside, something he always avoided except late at night. Yoshio hadn't set foot outside his house for about 2 years. As he pondered what to do, he turned his attention back to the game, realizing it would be a shame if he couldn't play anymore because the villagers were completely defeated. With no other choice, Yoshio decided to go out. As he got dressed and looked in the mirror, he noticed that while he hadn't gotten too fat, his clothes were now tighter. When he was a child, he used to imagine that in his 30s, he'd be a mature, respectable adult, believing it would happen naturally. However, the haggard and slovenly man reflected in the mirror made his heart race. A chill ran down his spine and he began to hesitate, thinking he would put it off, that he'd go out tomorrow if he felt more up to it. When he sat back down in front of the screen, he saw Carol walking cheerfully down the path, carrying a few sticks of firewood. Suddenly, she tripped on a rock and fell flat on the ground, the firewood scattering everywhere. Yoshio gasped and watched helplessly as Carol clutched her bruised knee. Undeterred, however, she wiped away her tears, picked up the firewood, and bravely continued toward the carriage. Struck by the little girl's resilience, Yoshio turned his attention to the other villagers. He saw Gams and Lotus hauling heavy logs while Kem and Layla washed clothes despite the biting cold. Realizing the villagers' situation was completely different from the day before, Yoshio resolved to do the best he could and headed for the door. His mother was surprised to see him in the hallway, realizing he was about to go out. She asked what was going on since this was such a rare sight. But Yoshio just replied that he'd be back soon, then stepped outside grabbing his bicycle. Yoshio walked past his stunned neighbors, noticing their stares and the whispers behind his back. A wave of self-hatred and guilt washed over him. He believed everyone found it funny to see him like this, and was scorning him for not working, even at his age. Closing his eyes in shame, he felt the weight of his humiliation crushing his shoulders. Suddenly he thought of the villagers in Village of Fate, and that will help him push aside his feelings of inferiority. He sped off toward the bookstore. When he arrived, he sold all his old games and books, and then browsed the shelves looking for books that could help him build the village. While searching, he stumbled upon a bunch of Isekai manga and realized that in those stories, people often expressed gratitude for being gifted modern knowledge. Although his situation in the game was different, it could still be a source of reference. However, he was too poor at the moment to buy anything new, not even for a few hundred yen. As he rode his bike home, he passed by the bakery, remembering the times he and his family had visited it in the past. When he entered the shop, the clerk greeted him, and as he looked at the cake display, he recalled how he and his sister used to pick out cakes together when they were little. Without looking up, he asked for 4 boxes of pudding, even though he thought to himself that it was probably a waste of money. When he got home, Yoshio found his mother in the living room. He handed her the bag with the pudding. His mother thanked him for the unexpected gift, and a flustered Yoshio said he'd bought enough for everyone, before quietly heading upstairs to his room. He wondered what he was so embarrassed about, then told himself that a useless person shouldn't feel satisfied just for doing one small thing. With a heavy heart, he looked up at the sky and muttered in despair, "What the hell am I doing at my age?" After selling off everything, Yoshio had charged 20,000 yen to exchange for fate points, bringing his total to 310. As he watched the villagers eating together around the campfire, he wondered what miracle he should perform next. The day before, he had discovered that the game system allowed him to review the villagers' past conversations. Although he found this feature interesting, it felt like eavesdropping, so he was uncomfortable using it. However, he realized that if he wanted to grant the villagers' wishes, he had no other choice. Determined to test it out, Yoshio decided to listen in on a conversation the girls had while he was out that day. While doing laundry, they commented on the good weather and the convenience of having a river near the campsite. Layla expressed her desire to bathe but was afraid of being attacked by monsters while naked. She said she wouldn't mind if the other villagers saw her since her husband and daughter were used to it, and Gams wasn't interested in her anyway. When Carol joined the conversation, Kem immediately shot back, saying that even though Gams seemed calm and indifferent, he was still a man. Yoshio concluded that he didn't need to worry about Layla or Carol, but realized that Kem's obsession with her brother seemed more serious than he'd thought. The rest of the conversation was pretty normal, except for when Layla mentioned the horde of monsters that had attacked their village. Kem revealed that it was a large village surrounded by sturdy stone walls and protected by many hunters besides Gams. However, the village was still overrun by monsters and many people lost their lives. Wanting to know more about what happened, Yoshio continued to review the three girls' conversation log and gathered more information about the event. The village once had several hundred residents, but was then attacked by a horde of monsters. They held out for a while, but were eventually overwhelmed and forced to flee. A few others managed to escape with them on carriages, but by the time our villagers realized it, they were the only ones left. Although they escaped the monsters and fled into the forest, their carriage broke down, making long-distance travel difficult. With a clearer picture of the villagers' circumstances, Yoshio now understood why the miracle involved escaping and reuniting with the other villagers. Looking at the screen, he promised the villagers they would be reunited with the others, but he was pulled out of the game when his mother called him down for dinner. When he went downstairs, Yoshio was surprised to see his father, his face expressionless, sitting at the kitchen table at such an early hour. Since he became a NEET, they'd still see each other a few times a month. But during those times, all his father would ever say were indifferent things like, "How have you been?" "Oh, is that so?" or "Do whatever you want." This strained relationship had been going on ever since their big fight, and rather than saying his father was being polite, it was probably more accurate to say he just didn't care about him anymore. Yoshio asked if his younger sister Sayuki was working overtime, and his mother confirmed she was. Unlike Yoshio, his sister was doing admirably, having gotten into the industry she wanted and seeming happy every day. His mother added that Sayuki didn't mind the overtime at all. Yoshio's mother then started talking about her day, saying she'd received some handmade tsukemono, or pickled vegetables, from a neighbor named Okiku and invited them to try some. She mentioned she'd run into Okiku while walking in the park. Okiku was an old woman who lived in the large, old-fashioned house nearby, and Yoshio remembered playing there with his childhood friend when they were kids, and how Mrs. Okiku would bring them candy. Although Yoshio's family home wasn't as grand as Okiku's, it was still a fairly spacious, detached house with a garden. The reason Yoshio could continue living as a NEET without being kicked out was thanks to his father's hard work and stable income. After thanking his mother for the meal, Yoshio quickly got up and left the table, taking his plate to the sink. His mother told him to take a pudding with him and asked if his father wanted one, explaining that her son had bought them for the whole family. His father's eyes widened when he heard that, making Yoshio feel anxious. After a moment of silence, his father accepted the pudding. Back in his room after finishing his food, Yoshio returned to the game. He noticed that everyone, except for Gams, had returned to the wagon to rest. Gams sat alone by the campfire, and Yoshio thanked him for his efforts in keeping watch at night. Silently appreciating Gams' dedication, the warrior stared intently at the flames, gently stirring the embers with a stick. And Yoshio remarked that Gams was truly a reliable person, with a quiet demeanor that somewhat resembled his own father. Gams was the only warrior in the group of villagers, while Lotus and his family had no combat abilities. Kem could use healing magic, but she was also unsuited for battle. Turning his back to the screen, Yoshio sighed and noted that both the villagers and he himself were depending too much on Gams, and he really wished he had a few more people to help out. He knew he could summon people to the village using fate points, but summoning a specific individual cost a lot of points. A cheaper alternative was to summon a random person, but this was like gambling. If he was unlucky, he might summon a criminal, and destruction could follow instantly. Yoshio also understood that getting deeply involved in pay-to-win elements was like getting lost in a bottomless swamp, and he knew it was best not to touch it if possible. Furthermore, he really wanted a familiar, and felt that he should save his points for when they were truly needed. Scratching his head, Yoshio felt helpless for worrying so much over just a game. He decided to save this line of thought for the next day, feeling tired after going out for the first time in a long while. Apologizing to Gams for not being able to help, he bid the villagers farewell and decided to go to sleep. However, just a moment later, Yoshio was startled by the sound of an alarm bell from the game. He turned back in shock, seeing an attack warning displayed on the screen. On high alert, Gams shouted for everyone to wake up before the attack began. The villagers pulled back the cloth flap of the wagon and looked towards Gams. They saw Gams standing with his back to them, facing the forest, weapon at the ready. With a dagger already in hand, Gams slowly drew his longsword from its sheath, prepared to face the danger. Without turning back, he declared that he could sense the presence of monsters. The warrior told Kem to protect everyone and not to leave the wagon under any circumstances. Lotus was terrified by the news of the attack and immediately told Layla and Carol to stay inside the wagon because it was too dangerous outside. Carol worriedly asked if Gams would be okay, as Gams prepared to fight alone. Kem declared that she would join the fight, but Gams firmly refused, pointing out that she could only use healing magic, and he needed her to stay and take care of everyone. The girl held back her tears and reluctantly accepted her brother's command. Yoshio screamed in panic at the screen, his hands gripping the monitor as he realized the area was too dark to see the monsters clearly. Suddenly, two dark creatures emerged from the bushes in front of the firelight, growling menacingly towards Gams. The god of fate noticed these monsters, and the game identified them as black dogs, wild dogs that had turned into ferocious, carnivorous monsters with physical abilities far superior to normal dogs, and sometimes their fangs were venomous. Yoshio grew worried at this description, realizing that no matter how strong Gams was, he still had to face two monsters at once. Gams stood his ground calmly, crossing his swords, not even blinking as he stared at the monsters that were slowly approaching, growling and ready to attack. Meanwhile, Yoshio unconsciously began to pray for Gams' victory, but then he remembered that he was a god. He quickly grabbed the mouse, searching for a miracle he could use in this emergency. While Gams maintained his cold gaze on the pack of monsters, the two black dogs attacked simultaneously, trying to flank Gams from both sides. They circled him, but with masterful skill, Gams used both his swords to slash at the right moment, hitting both monsters. The black dogs were thrown back, letting out final yelps before collapsing from their wounds. With a grim expression on his face, Gams walked over to the nearest creature and kicked its leg to make sure it was dead. Then, he plunged his longsword into the monster's body to confirm its death. Yoshio, who had witnessed the entire fight, shouted with joy, praising Gams and calling him a badass as he stared excitedly at the screen. Kem then approached her brother, asking if he was all right. The smile on her face turned to concern as Gams apologized and struggled to say that from now on, he would have to rely on her, before collapsing to the ground. Kem's eyes widened at the sight, and she screamed for her brother as Gams lay motionless, covered in sweat on the ground. Yoshio panicked. Grabbing the computer monitor with both hands, his face contorted with shock and worry for Gams' fate. Yoshio yelled that it was a perfect victory as Kem knelt down, placed her brother's head on her lap, and held him tightly in her arms. Lotus ran over to help, while Gams' face winced in pain, sweat pouring down relentlessly. The god of fate, Yoshio, watched helplessly as the village's most important warrior lay on the ground, gravely injured. He shouted, urging Gams to pull himself together. Kem desperately clung to her brother's limp body, feeling it grow cold as she screamed endlessly, begging him not to give up. Yoshio, stunned and terrified, grabbed the computer monitor and yelled, trying to understand what was happening to Gams. Lotus approached the distraught Kem, telling her to calm down. He took Gams' arm and found that his pulse was still there, but his body was rapidly growing cold and his face was turning pale. Upon closer inspection, he noticed a deep wound on Gams' forearm. His expression changed when he saw the strange color around the wound. Lotus turned his head to look at the black dog impaled by Gams' sword and realized that Gams had been bitten. The painful truth became clear. The monster's fangs were venomous. Lotus hurriedly asked Kem if she could use any detoxification magic. Hearing this, a glimmer of hope sparked in Yoshio. He remembered that Kem could use healing magic and thought that Gams would be fine. Yoshio began to believe he had been worrying too much. However, that hope was quickly shattered when Kem painfully admitted that she hadn't learned any detoxification magic yet. In a panic, Kem asked Lotus if they had any antidotes in their luggage, but the former shopkeeper lowered his gaze and apologized for not having any such medicine. Carol, huddled next to her mother, watched with trembling fear, slowly realizing what that meant. Kem trembled in anguish and panic, clutching her brother tightly, begging him not to leave her. Tears streamed down her cheeks as she looked up at the sky, pleading with the god of fate to save her brother, willing to do anything in return, and begging with all her heart. Yoshio, seeing the desperate pleas from his loyal followers, felt a wave of panic. He knew that if Gams died, it would all be over. Faced with the villagers' desperation, Yoshio wondered if there was anything he could do. Seeing their worried faces, he begged God to do something. Suddenly, Yoshio's resolve returned. He remembered that he was a god and had to rise to the challenge. Shaking off his panic, Yoshio declared that only a miracle could solve the situation. Recalling what he had learned about the game, he thought of ways to turn the tide. Opening the miracles section, he scrolled through the list of options, dismissing choices like a peddler or a hunter, which would be useless in this situation. Finally, he found a miracle called a traveling doctor appears. However, the cost of 300 points was steep, but Yoshio was certain this doctor would have the antidote. He hurriedly moved the mouse and activated the miracle while also declaring that even though it was activated, there was no guarantee the doctor would appear immediately. In any case, he had no choice but to bet on this miracle. Suddenly, a noise in the middle of the night made his mother call out from the stairs, but Yoshio barely noticed, completely focused on the situation in the game. He wondered if the doctor's immediate appearance would be too suspicious, since the timing was so convenient. Glancing at the wall clock, he realized it was already past midnight, so he typed a few lines and waited to see what would happen. At the camp, Kem continued to hold her brother tightly, desperately trying to call him back to consciousness. Suddenly, she heard a voice from behind her. A man in a cloak with a leather pouch at his hip emerged from the forest on the other side of the campfire, his face resolute. Seeing the stranger, Kem didn't let go of her brother, but demanded the man reveal his identity. Lotus, holding Gams' spare sword, stood protectively in front of his family, while both Layla and Carol stared at the stranger with fearful eyes. The man told them not to worry, introducing himself as a traveling doctor. Though Lotus still stood his ground with a sword, the girls looked at each other, confused and suspicious. Yoshio felt it was only natural for the villagers to be suspicious of a stranger appearing at just the right moment, and he smiled wearily as he hit enter. The Bible next to Kem began to glow once again, its pages turning on their own until they reached the latest prophecy from the god of fate. Reading the glowing letters, Kem couldn't hold back her tears. She looked up to the heavens and expressed her profound gratitude to the god for saving her brother. Lotus witnessed this, while the traveling doctor said that he had come to the right place and asked for permission to examine Gams' wound. Lotus, though still surprised, agreed and let the doctor approach. The doctor stood before Gams with Kem still clinging tightly to her brother. She bowed her head and pleaded with the doctor for help, while Carol prayed for Gams' safety. Examining the bleeding wound caused by the black dog, the doctor quickly identified the cause of the illness. He opened his leather pouch and took out a bottle of antidote, pouring some of it into Gams' mouth and the rest over the open wound. The warrior's face contorted in pain as the antidote began to take effect. But soon after, he began to relax, and color returned to his face. The villagers cheered at this positive turn of events while Yoshio let out a sigh of relief, leaning back in his chair, glad that the miracle had worked and the doctor had arrived in time. He thought to himself that he would have to thank this long-haired doctor, though he wasn't sure of their gender. Meanwhile, Kem still held her brother tightly, her heart filled with relief. Lotus picked up the Bible and read its contents aloud. The god of fate had written that by his power he had guided the doctor to their location, and that Gams did not yet belong to his world, so he would bless this brave warrior. He added that hardships would continue from here on, but reminded them that he was always watching over them. Yoshio had tried to write like a real god, but he wasn't sure if it had worked. He breathed a sigh of relief when he saw Lotus interpret the meaning, just as he had intended. Looking at the screen, Yoshio declared that they had all done very well, and from here on, he could only watch. The next morning, Layla and Carol went into the forest to pick berries. The little girl asked if Gams would get better after eating these berries, and her mother happily assured her that he would recover. Meanwhile, Lotus stood guard anxiously in the forest, taking over Gams' duties. He carefully watched all directions, sword at the ready, declaring that now he had to protect everyone. When he heard a noise in a nearby bush, Lotus was startled and fell backward onto the ground, but then sighed in relief when only a white rabbit hopped out and ran away. At the camp, Kem knelt beside her brother as he rested, while the doctor was using a mortar and pestle to mix herbs. After a moment of hesitation, the priestess asked why the doctor was passing through this area. The doctor explained that his family had been healers for generations, and the place they were in was called the Forbidden Forest, a place teeming with monsters but also rich in medicinal herbs. The night before, just as he had finished gathering herbs and was preparing to make camp, he saw a pillar of light in the middle of the forest. Faced with this strange phenomenon, he was unsure whether to investigate, but a sense of unease urged him to move toward the light. Kem devoutly declared that it must have been the guidance of the spirits. The doctor admitted that although they revered Mother Nature above all and didn't believe in any specific god, what happened last night might truly have been a divine act. Yoshio crossed his arms, thinking about how the doctor was agnostic, meaning he acknowledged the existence of gods, but whether he believed in them was another matter. Then he let out a long, tired yawn. Kem asked the doctor if he would be returning soon, but he replied that even though they were past the hard part, he still couldn't abandon his patients. He added that he could linger for a bit and asked if they would allow him to stay with them. Kem's face lit up at this, and she invited the doctor to stay as long as he liked. However, she also noted that they didn't currently have any lodging and asked if he would be okay with that. Yoshio watched everything with satisfaction, realizing the situation had been saved now that the doctor had decided to stay in the village. But then he thought about the lodging issue. The carriage was full, and if the doctor were to sleep outside, someone else would have to as well. Moreover, although they had overcome the danger this time, it was only a brief respite. Yoshio understood that if the black dogs attacked again, the villagers would face annihilation. Even though Gams had been saved, he likely wouldn't be able to move normally for the next few days. Lotus wasn't someone who could replace Gams in a fight. Yoshio concluded that what they really needed was a safe shelter, and began to wonder how he could use his fate points to get one. Just then, the doctor offered a solution to this problem, revealing that there was an abandoned mine nearby. This cave could shelter them from the wind and rain, and they might even find tools left behind by the miners. Yoshio was stunned by this new development, surprised that the doctor knew about the existence of such a place near the camp. He felt grateful that the villagers now had a safe place to take shelter. Lotus was overjoyed, asking the doctor to lead the way, and soon after they set off. The destination was only about 5 minutes away from their current campsite, which meant they would be able to come back later for the wood. The carriage moved through 2 narrow paths, hugging the cliffside until they reached a tunnel sealed by 2 doors. The doctor explained that the large door was used for transporting goods, while the smaller one was the main entrance to the tunnel. It seemed people used to mine here, but then they found a more valuable ore deposit nearby. So the miners had turned this place into a residential area and storage facility. The doctor and Lotus opened the large door and the villagers drove the carriage inside the cave. The doctor then lit a lantern hanging on the wall, making the surrounding space glow brightly, and instantly, all the other lamps in the cave lit up as well. The light from the lanterns illuminated a vast space inside the cave, furnished with a table, several chairs, containers, and many doors leading to other rooms carved into the rock face. The villagers were astonished by the size of the place, and Yoshio was no less impressed. Although the cave seemed dirty compared to living in the carriage, this was a huge improvement for the villagers. Lotus was excited to discover that the doors led to private rooms, and the doctor explained that the miners had dug them themselves to have separate corridors. However, his explanation seemed to fall on deaf ears as everyone was too captivated by their new home. In the carriage, Kem gently held her brother's hand, telling Gams that they had reached a safe place and that she hoped he would recover soon. Meanwhile, Layla noticed a stream of fresh water flowing from the cave wall, along with a stone furnace and a full set of basic cooking utensils. She happily announced that they could start with the housework, which made Carol incredibly excited. But first, she rolled up her sleeves, determined to do a major cleanup. Yoshio, feeling relieved, declared to himself how incredibly grateful he was to the doctor for leading the villagers to a safe place to stay. As time passed, the doctor tended to Gams in one of the rooms as he slowly recovered. Layla reminded everyone to keep quiet so as not to disturb the warrior, and also asked them to clean up thoroughly to surprise him when he woke up. The villagers quickly got to work, rearranging the furniture in the cave, scrubbing the floors and carrying unnecessary items outside, leaving the repairable ones in a corner. Carol diligently scrubbed the floor in one room and cheerfully declared that she would share a room with Gams, daydreaming about sleeping in the same bed with Kem's brother. Kem overheard this, her eyes flashing menacingly as she watched the little girl from the doorway, telling herself that obviously her brother had to share a room with her. Even though Carol was still young and didn't think much of it, Kem felt Gams had spoiled Carol too much and should turn her down, child or not. Unexpectedly, Layla also heard this conversation and turned away, Yoshio felt a bit worried about the relationship between Kem and Carol, but noticed that they generally got along like normal villagers. He believed that as long as they could turn this cave into a comfortable home, they wouldn't have to worry about lodging for the time being, and he could start building a real village. Letting out a sigh of satisfaction, Yoshio stood up and stretched, realizing it was already noon. His eyes felt tired and his stomach was empty, and he thought about going to find something to eat. As he left his room, the door opposite him also opened, and he came face to face with his younger sister, Sayuki. She looked at him with a casual expression, noting his disheveled appearance. Yoshio froze, awkwardly calling his sister's name. Sayuki brushed her hair over her shoulder as she looked at her brother. Yoshio asked if she was on vacation, but got no response. Sayuki then demanded he get out of her way so she could go down to eat, but he stammered that he was also about to head to the first floor. Hearing this, Sayuki, with a forceful attitude, made it clear that he was not allowed to use the first floor bathroom, her hand on her hip as she looked down on him. Yoshio turned back to face his sister, about to reply, but images of the incident with the stalker immediately flooded his mind. He bowed his head in shame, stepped aside, and turned his back once more, saying he wouldn't use the first floor bathroom and continued down the stairs. Seeing this, Sayuki looked annoyed, telling him he should at least talk back a little, calling him pathetic and asking if he thought she was stupid. Back in his room, Yoshio noticed his sister was much more irritable than usual. Ever since the incident with the stalker, the air between them was always heavy whenever they met. But it wasn't like that before. They used to be very close, often sitting and playing together. Now, everything had completely changed. Yoshio sadly wondered if they would still be close siblings if the incident had never happened. A sharp pain flared from his scar, and he recalled the confrontation, but then told himself he had to keep moving forward. Yoshio realized that no matter how much he regretted it, nothing would change. Yoshio decided to check on the villagers, zooming in on the common room in the cave. Having nearly finished cleaning up, Layla commented on the state of the place, while Lotus asked where Kem was. His wife replied that Kem was taking care of Gams. Hearing this, Carol decided to head over, but her father told her to leave them be for now. He then suggested she explore the rest of the cave with him, and Carol happily agreed, promising to give Gams a tour once he recovered. Meanwhile, the doctor was busy writing something while Gams was recovering in a bed beside him. Kem entered the room, asking the doctor's permission to look after her brother while he rested. The doctor agreed, noting that the symptoms from the venom had stabilized, and told her to call him if anything unusual happened. When it was just the two of them, Kem took her brother's hand, gently telling him she was right there with him. Yoshio saw that Gam's condition was stable, and believed it would be fine to leave him alone for a short while. Suddenly, he noticed a pop-up window that read, "Warrior's Dream." Curious about what it meant, he clicked on it. Yoshio was startled as the screen completely changed. When the image stabilized, Yoshio found himself witnessing an unfamiliar place. A younger Gams walked through a door, and a staff member handed him a bag with his reward for slaying monsters, congratulating him on completing his first quest. Yoshio quickly realized he was witnessing Gam's dream. Gams thanked the staff member, and although other adventurers invited him for a drink, he politely declined, saying his little sister was waiting for him at home. Yoshio guessed that Gams was referring to Kem, and noted that the warrior had also had an innocent time in his past. When Gams returned home, he walked in to find his father drinking at the table, surrounded by empty bottles. Gams, disappointed, remarked that he was drinking again, causing the man to angrily throw a bottle at him and yell about his attitude. Unfazed, Gams threw the money pouch on the table as payment for watching Kem while he was out working. The father opened the pouch, immediately planning to buy more alcohol. But when Gams asked about his sister, the man suddenly fell silent. Gams rushed downstairs and was horrified to find Kem wearing only tattered rags, lying on a dirty cloth on the floor. Nearly starved, he lifted her up, desperately telling her to hang on, and asked how many days it had been since she'd eaten. Yoshio, shocked by the scene, muttered that this was child abuse. Gams trembled with rage, apologizing for not deciding to leave that place with his sister sooner. He stood up, resolved to leave the house. His father tried to stop him, saying he was just careless because he was drunk and promised to keep his word from now on. But Gams, without hesitation, glared at his father, telling him to get out of the way unless he wanted to die. Gam's menacing look made the man immediately obey. In the snowy night, Gams walked down the street carrying his sister on his back. Little Kem asked Gams where they were going, and he replied anywhere, as long as it wasn't there. Kem worried that if they didn't go back soon, their father would be very angry. but Gams coldly stated that they would never see him again, so there was no need to be scared or worried. Kem then said that maybe their parents hated her because she was a bad kid, since she was always getting yelled at. But Gams angrily denied it, saying that their parents were the terrible ones. They had even said they would sell Kem into slavery because she was spoiled and useless, telling her to at least do something useful. Yoshio quietly realized the horrible environment Kem and Gams had grown up in. Gams stopped, set his sister down, and turned to tell her not to think of them as parents anymore, to just forget them. He also said she could live with him from now on if she wanted. Kem happily said that all she needed was her brother. Gams hugged her and promised that from now on the two of them would live happily together. Kem agreed with her brother, and the screen returned to normal. Yoshio, after witnessing this dream, understood why Kem was so obsessed with her brother. She had relied on such a wonderful older brother and had become dependent on him. As Kem held Gams's hand, the warrior woke up and told his sister that he must have worried her. Kem burst into tears and hugged her brother tightly in relief. Everyone around them realized Gams had woken up, and Lotus congratulated the doctor while Layla and Carol celebrated. Yoshio let out a sigh of relief, leaning back and allowing himself to relax a little, noticing that all the villagers were overjoyed. No one in the village was as reliable as Gams, a character who would naturally be loved by everyone. Yoshio gave a dry laugh, thinking that Gams, unlike him, was always ready to risk his life to protect his sister, and the bond between them would never change. As he continued to laugh nervously, Yoshio suddenly felt tears streaming down his face. He wiped them away, wondering why he still hadn't changed, despite regretting what had happened so deeply that he was crying. Slumping over the table in frustration, he declared that he wanted to change, as the tears continued to fall. Yoshio looked out his bedroom window, his heart aching as he saw his father and younger sister Sayuki leaving the house early for work. Sayuki was complimenting their father's tie, which she had given him a long time ago. Yoshio could only watch them leave in silence, until he heard a chime from his computer. He turned his attention to the screen and saw Layla cooking in the cave, asking Carol to clear the dishes while she finished the meal before Gams and the doctor returned from their patrol. 3 days had passed since the villagers moved into the cave. The cave was now fully equipped with the necessary furniture and supplies for living, and everyone was doing their part. The villagers' lives had improved significantly, a far cry from the makeshift situation when they were outdoors. Lotus finished repairing some furniture while Kem was building some small structures. Yoshio noted the stark difference between their previous makeshift camp and the well-equipped safe cave they now inhabited. He thought that spending the money to make the miracle happen was truly worth it. As he checked on how the forest patrol was going, he admitted that the greatest blessing from the miracle was the doctor's presence. The doctor was in a clearing in the forest where Gam stood firm, his hands gripping 2 swords facing a ferocious wild boar. His eyes never left the charging monster. As the boar charged, Gams crossed his swords and blocked the attack, but was still pushed back step by step by the beast's strength. While Gams held the boar on the defensive, Dr. Mulis emerged from the bushes, drew his longbow and aimed straight for the boar's head. When the arrow was released, it flew true and embedded itself deep in the beast's eye. The doctor stepped out from the bushes, advising Gams not to overexert himself while he was still recovering from his previous injury. Gams thanked the doctor and called him Mulis. Mulis was the one who had been summoned by Yoshio's traveling doctor appears miracle. Not only was he an expert in medicinal herbs and healing, but Mulis was also a skilled archer, perfectly complementing Gams's close combat skills. In addition, Mulis could use magic to control plants, and thanks to this magic, the time it took for wood to dry, which usually took months, was shortened instantly. It was Mulis who had led the villagers to the cave, and Yoshio sighed, hoping that the doctor would officially join the village. For now, Mulis was still considered a guest, and there wasn't much information about him, nor were the conditions for him to join the village known. Yoshio felt frustrated that he had spent 30,000 fate points to summon Mulis, yet the doctor had not officially joined the group. After the doctor and the warrior tied up the wild boar and dragged it back to the cave, they were greeted by Layla and Carol in the main area. Lotus marveled at the prey they had just hunted, and Carol was excited when her mother announced they would be having meat for dinner that night. However, Layla lamented that they didn't have much salt and spices left, stressing that they were crucial for cooking and preserving meat. Yoshio realized this was indeed a serious problem. Although there were many plants and an abundant source of fish around the cave, if the villagers wanted to secure a stable food supply, they would have no choice but to start building a new farm. He realized that sooner or later they would need spices, salt, and seeds for cultivation. Yoshio wondered if he should use the A Merchant Visits miracle to summon a merchant to the village. However, with a surge of enthusiasm, Yoshio declared that there was another miracle he wanted to activate at all costs: summoning a golem as a familiar. A golem is a humanoid puppet, capable of understanding and carrying out simple commands from its master. This creature doesn't need rest and can work all day long. What was particularly appealing to Yoshio was that the golem was not just a tireless labor machine. The player could also control it with a game controller. These giant golems made of stone not only provided combat power but also helped solve the labor shortage in the village. With the ability to control a golem, Yoshio would be able to shift from merely observing to participating directly in the life of the village. Yoshio realized the huge problem. Summoning a golem required a staggering 700 fate points, equivalent to 70,000 yen in real money. He had already spent 300 points just to summon Mulus, which left him with almost no fate points for a while. But saving Gam's life and his daily prophecies had made the villagers increasingly grateful to their god. Now he had recovered 160 points. Yoshio received 10 points each day from the villagers' gratitude and hoped to save enough to summon the golem, as long as he didn't use them for nearly 2 months. Scratching his head, he told himself it was going to be a long road. He also realized he could no longer afford to buy more fate points, as his savings had run dry. In previous years, Yoshio had lived frugally and hadn't spent all the money he'd saved since childhood, along with the allowances from his father whenever he was in a good mood. But ever since joining Village of Fate, he had poured all his money into the game. Lifting his head, he saw the villagers happily eating dinner around the table. Sighing, he stood up and went downstairs to make a cup of coffee. A little later, as he sat sipping his hot coffee, Yoshio noticed that a few days ago, Kem and Gams had been working together to create something. Curious about the result, he watched as Kem cheerfully announced they were almost finished. She asked her brother if what they were doing was disrespectful. Before them was a shrine to the god of fate, with a crude statue carved from a tree trunk. Gams patted his sister's head, reassuring her that the most important thing was her sentiment, and he was sure those thoughts would reach the god. Mulus approached, asking if this was a replacement statue for their god, and the priestess confirmed it was, apologizing for the crudely carved statue. They had built this place for worship and to make offerings. Realizing this was an altar, Yoshio felt pleased by the villagers' devotion. However, he also noted that the statue was so crudely carved that it was difficult to tell the god's gender. Although he had previously thought the god of fate was male, he now wondered what this deity was really all about. Kem placed 3 fruits on the altar as an offering, and as the villagers began to pray, the fruits began to glow and then vanished. Yoshio was surprised to see the offering disappear, but then realized that in the villagers' world, gods existed naturally, so this phenomenon wasn't too surprising. He noticed his fate points had increased by 1 and believed it was because of the offering. A pop-up window appeared, explaining that fate points increased not only from gratitude but also from offerings, with more valuable items yielding more points. The window also encouraged him to continue helping the villagers. Processing this information like a game show host, Yoshio wondered if he should talk to the villagers about offering their unneeded items to the god. Although he could earn more points from valuable items, he didn't want to become a burden to the villagers and decided against forcing them. Kem's holy book glowed as a new prophecy appeared. Yoshio expressed his gratitude for the villagers' sentiment as they gathered around to listen, with Mulus standing by a wall, arms crossed, observing. The god of fate said that there was no need to trouble themselves, and that the villagers were free to offer any surplus or unneeded items to him. He could transform items and thoughts into miracles. Yoshio worried if this prophecy would make him sound like he was begging. But the villagers innocently praised him as a humble and caring god. Yoshio realized how naive and pure the villagers were, thinking that if they lived in modern Japan, they would probably be easily tricked by scams or shady religions. He had to admit, they were indeed being deceived by a god right now. The next day, Laudus asked Gams to help him carry a hollow log into the cave and place it on the altar. After praying, the log disappeared. Yoshio was surprised they could offer such a large object, and wondered if they intended to make offerings every day. It seemed that offering things to their god had become a fun event for the villagers. Realizing it was already afternoon, Yoshio stretched but then heard his mother tell him he had a package. Surprised by his mother's impatience, he went downstairs and took the package. He was shocked to see the package was from Village of Fate. Unable to believe he'd received a gift from a virtual world, Yoshio lied that he'd won a contest, trying to convince himself it was just a gift from the game company. Maybe some reference material or a guidebook. As Yoshio sighed, realizing how ridiculous his worrying was, his mother opened the package. Yoshio's eyes widened in shock when he saw that inside the package were the 3 strange fruits from the game a few days ago. His mother, unable to recognize the fruit, innocently asked if he wanted to try some exotic fruit and decided to have some for dessert. Yoshio stood there, staring in amazement at the fruit, noticing it looked like an apple but had a refreshing lemon scent. He remembered that the villagers had loved its taste, and when he took a bite, the heavenly flavor filled him with satisfaction. He concluded that this must be a thoughtful gesture from the game developers, perhaps a new type of fruit imported into Japan from overseas. He had no complaints about receiving such a delicious fruit. The next day, Yoshio thanked the villagers for their offerings and advised them not to force themselves, and also not to waste food. He told them that if they didn't have any spare food, he would accept other items. He also reminded them that they didn't need to make offerings every day and that they should prioritize taking care of themselves. Yoshio told himself that once he had enough points to summon a golem, he would be able to truly help everyone. As he watched Kem cleaning the god statue, Yoshio was pulled out of the game by his mother's shouting, demanding he come downstairs immediately in an angry voice. When he went down, his mother asked in shock what he planned to do with that thing. Yoshio was startled to realize that the log the villagers had offered the day before had been sent to him from Village of Fate. He was stunned, thinking this joke had gone too far. Yoshio struggled to carry the heavy log to the backyard, recalling the conversation with his mother, when she told him he should do something with his ridiculously well-trained body, and he grew tired just moving the log to the backyard. He suddenly realized that Laudus and Gams must have also done this kind of hard labor, when he directed them to cut down trees in the game. Yoshio tried to shake off this thought, telling himself it was just a game, and he shouldn't take receiving a log from Village of Fate so seriously. But since he couldn't just treat this delivery as normal, he decided to file a complaint with the game company. While searching for contact information on the parcel, Yoshio was surprised to find no phone number or any other information. The package only had a shipping mark from Hokkaido, but when he looked up the company and address on a satellite map, he only saw a small building. This made him doubt that such a small company could produce a high-quality game like Village of Fate. He wondered if they developed the game somewhere else. Yoshio groaned at the mystery of this company, frustrated that he couldn't and didn't want to go to Hokkaido to check in person. He wondered what to do with the giant log. The next day, another package arrived. This time, it was a cooler box. When he opened the cooler and saw it was full of fresh meat, he guessed it must be from the ferocious wild boar that Gams and Mulas had taken down the day before. Remembering that Kem had offered this at the altar, he was shocked to see it appear in the real world. His mother walked into the kitchen and looked at the box, asking worriedly if he was spending money on something suspicious. Thinking quickly, Yoshio told his mother about an online site that was collecting ideas for revitalizing rural villages. He explained that his idea had been approved, and so he was talking with the villagers who often sent him local specialties as gifts. His mother happily believed the story, while Yoshio thought to himself that technically it wasn't a lie. He gave his mother the meat, telling her it was wild boar and to cook it for dinner. As his mother wondered how to cook it, Yoshio worried about whether it was safe to eat, telling himself it couldn't possibly be real monster meat. From then on, Yoshio started receiving gifts from Village of Fate almost daily, including various fruits, monster meat, and even a crystal that lit up when activated, which he assumed had a light bulb inside. He also received logs from time to time, having received 3 of them and starting to wonder if he could sell them somewhere. As he dragged them into the garden, Yoshio gradually formed a theory that by developing the village in the game, high-value items would be sent to the player as offerings. Yoshio wondered if the game was created by wealthy people, and perhaps he had been randomly chosen as a beta tester. One evening, he was having dinner with his parents, and they were enjoying the monster meat he had received from the village. His father ate in silence, looking somewhat uncomfortable, while his mother curiously asked if they could get more fruit, revealing that she felt healthier after eating it. Yoshio agreed to ask the villagers. His mother added that Sayuki also really liked the meat, and his father praised the dish, saying it had a natural, consistent flavor. Yoshio realized it had been a long time since he'd seen his father say so much in one sentence, and thought he must be very pleased, especially with the garden. Yoshio then decided to try his hand at woodworking with the logs he'd received, hoping he could teach the villagers something. As Yoshio used the saw, he realized the work was harder than he'd thought, wondering if he was doing it wrong. His father approached, asking what he was doing. Yoshio replied that it would be a waste not to use the wood, and then asked to borrow his father's toolkit. Yoshio tried to continue sawing, but the blade got stuck fast in the log. His father told him to step aside, then took the tool. Yoshio was amazed to see his father easily saw through the log, telling him as he worked that he was holding the saw incorrectly. Yoshio realized his father had done it that way to avoid making noise and bothering the neighbors, before handing the tool back to him. From then on, his father started giving him advice. That weekend, the father and son worked together, cutting wood into planks to repair the garden fence. Yoshio also wondered if he could teach the villagers how to cook meat, so he asked his mother to teach him about cooking, and eventually he was able to cook on his own. He started a daily routine of eating lunch with the villagers in the game. One night, while he was in the kitchen, Sayuki returned from work, and he was able to greet her. Yoshio realized all of this was thanks to Village of Fate, and he wasn't sure if he was helping the villagers or if the villagers were helping him. The only thing he was worried about was the village's defense system. Gams was checking the fence surrounding the cave entrance. When Kem asked if the monsters could jump over the fence, he assured her that even if they did get past it, he and Mulis could handle the monsters. But the big problem was when they were outnumbered, just like last time. However, he coolly said that worrying wouldn't help. Yoshio noticed that the villagers seemed more confident about their defenses, but at the same time, he discovered something strange. Although at first glance their lives seemed peaceful and stable, it looked like they were trying to act calm while they were actually anxious. Carol started to notice this every day. The conversations between everyone became forced and dull, and they would sigh whenever they looked at the wooden calendar. As the month drew to a close, Yoshio wondered if something special was about to happen. Then, as all the villagers gathered around the dining table, Carol asked everyone why they looked so gloomy. At that, they all exchanged worried glances. Lotus and Layla tried to reassure Carol with a lie, but she quickly pointed out that everyone got tense whenever they looked at the wooden calendar. Realizing he couldn't hide the situation any longer, her father gently patted her head and sat down beside her. He recalled that when they lived in the village, they always told her not to leave the house on the last day of the month. Carol remembered that the village would be on lockdown then, and the adults were fearful and quick to anger on that day. Lotus told his daughter that all of it was to protect the children and asked if she remembered about the world's calendar. Then, Layla explained that each month, one of 7 gods is responsible for ruling the world. These gods included the gods of earth, moon, nature, water, fire, light, and thunder. Yoshio diligently took notes. Carol then asked her father why there were only 7 gods in charge, when there were 12 months. Lotus explained that these 7 gods were originally only in charge of each week, and their names were used for the days of the week. These gods were considered the main gods of the world, and they also controlled many lower-ranking gods like the god of fate. Yoshio now had a better understanding of his place in the game. The 7-day system collapsed after a massive battle occurred between the gods. Power constantly shifted between them, causing extreme weather fluctuations whenever one god gained the upper hand. This war lasted for a whole year before the gods stopped fighting, and from then on the 7 gods became the rulers of both the 7 days of the week and the periods when they flourished. The losing gods were deemed evil gods and were exiled deep within the earth, but they have continued to grow in power to this day. Once a month, they try to reappear in the world and grant power to the monsters. The last day of the month is called the Temptation of the Evil God, which is when monsters become stronger and more vicious. Yoshio realized this was the reason the villagers had become so tense. When he saw that the villagers' calendar matched the one in his real world, he realized there were only 10 days left before the temptation of the evil god would occur. Yoshio worried that with his current number of fate points, he realized he had no way to protect the villagers. When the clock struck 11 p.m., he noticed Lotus sitting alone at the dining table, which rarely happened. His wife asked what was wrong, pointing out that he hadn't been sleeping well lately. Lotus clutched his head, saying he couldn't shake the memory of the last temptation of the evil god. He said they were lucky to have escaped without any injuries. But thinking about the possibility of another monster attack, he couldn't help but worry that he might lose his family this time. His body trembled uncontrollably. Seeing Lotus's reaction, Yoshio wondered what had happened during the previous temptation of the evil god. About 3 weeks ago at the old village, Carol woke up in her bed on a peaceful and sunny morning, wondering where her parents were. She went to the mirror and checked her face, happy to see she was as cute as ever. Then, she went down to the kitchen and greeted her parents with a good morning, and they happily replied. Her mother reminded her to wash her face before breakfast. Little Carol happily ran outside and washed her face at the well, feeling the cool, refreshing water. Suddenly, she remembered she'd forgotten her face towel. Fixing her hair, she told herself she was a good girl. Just then, Kem appeared with a bucket of water and asked if she had just woken up. Carol wondered about her brother, Gams, and Kem gave a strange reply, saying he was guarding the village gate. Carol let out a big yawn and declared he wasn't there, feigning disinterest, which annoyed the priestess. Then, Carol hurried off and shut the door, ignoring Kem's shouts from behind. Back at the dining table, she pretended to know nothing about the conversation she just had and started enjoying her breakfast. After finishing her meal, Carol got ready to go out. When her mother asked where she was going, she cheerfully replied that she was going to find Gams, then quickly left the house, ignoring her mother's warnings. As she skipped through the town, the villagers greeted her and praised her energy. One vendor even gave her some fruit, while another asked where her parents were. Carol stopped in front of the wall protecting the village, remarking with surprise that it was as big as ever. She turned around and saw Gams with the other hunters gathering near the main gate, fully armed and looking exhausted. The little girl ran to Gams, hugging her brother tightly, which surprised him. Gams gently told her she couldn't go outside today, and when Carol asked why, he explained that today was a special day. Gams pointed out that there were no other children on the streets besides her. Noticing this and seeing the warriors preparing so carefully, Carol asked if Gams and the others had built the wall. Gams explained that decades ago there was a great war in this region, and this place used to be an important fortress. After the war, refugees settled within the walls of the abandoned fortress and began to prosper, turning it into a town. Carol listened but didn't fully understand everything he was saying. She asked if the walls could protect everyone from any enemy, but her conversation with Gams was cut short by Layla, her mother, who approached with a look of worry, yet pride. She happily scooped up her runaway daughter and carried her away. Another warrior asked Gams if he knew them, and he revealed that they were his neighbors and had been very kind to wanderers like him and his sister. The soldier remarked that the family didn't seem to have a trace of fear, and Gams explained that since the town was founded, the walls had never been breached. Layla apologized for Carol's interruption, promising to give her a stern talking to later. But Gams told her to go easy on her, as Carol waved goodbye, saying she'd see him later. Gams waved back until she was out of sight. Then he lowered his hand, anxiously wondering if there really would be a later. Seeing the commotion throughout the town, Carol asked her mother if there was a festival going on. Layla, while knitting, looked out the window and said it would be nice if it were a festival. Then, changing her tone, she suggested they could have a party tomorrow. Carol cheered and jumped for joy as she saw her parents smile at each other. While Carol played without a care, the villagers rushed their preparations, bringing materials to reinforce the gate and readying themselves for an attack. Layla looked out the window as Lotus told his wife he had prepared everything they needed in the carriage as a precaution, just in case. He hoped nothing would happen and that all the preparations would be for nothing. He clasped his hands in prayer that they could get through the day unharmed, wishing for everything to remain as it was so they could greet the dawn the next day. That night, the warriors on the walls fired volleys of arrows at the horde of monsters approaching the town, taking down many of the enemy. But the brave defenders were horrified to see more than 20 monsters attacking at once, something they had never faced before. Many different species had joined forces and were attacking all at once. The gate commander ordered them to reinforce the defenses, hoping the stream of monsters would exhaust itself against the fortified gate without getting any further. Outside, the monsters charged and slammed their weapons against the iron gate. Suddenly, one of them fell, pierced by a spear from the wall. Gams stood there, a handful of darts in one hand, a spear gripped tightly in the other, ready to strike. The other warriors followed Gams's lead, determined not to let the monsters enter the town, no matter the cost. Suddenly, a giant creature appeared behind the goblin horde. A green creature lapped onto its hand and was immediately thrown towards the wall, knocking the person next to Gams off the wall and down into the town. As Gams realized what was happening, more and more monsters were being thrown over the wall, circling around to launch a surprise attack from within, slaughtering the thinning ranks of warriors. Gams wondered how it had come to this as the merciless monsters closed in and broke through the gate. The villagers screamed in terror as they fled deeper into the town for their lives. In his home, Lotus and his family huddled together, holding each other tight. Her parents begged God to at least spare Carol's life. Lotus screamed as something began to kick violently at the reinforced door until it finally burst open. Gams, covered in blood, entered the house with his sister Kem, asking if everyone was all right. The family breathed a sigh of relief at the sight of the warrior, and Layla asked if they were okay. Gams reassured them, saying he was covered in monster blood, while Kem was covered in the blood of those she had healed. As Kem tended to her brother's wounds, Lotus asked the warrior about the state of the battle, and Gams began to answer that things weren't going well, before declaring grimly that the battle was hopeless. The gate had been breached, and a horde of monsters was pouring into the town. Most of the defenders who could fight had already fallen. Gams had left the front lines when all seemed lost, wondering if he could at least save his sister and Lotus's family. He declared that the situation was beyond saving, and told everyone they needed to leave immediately. Seeing his family filled with fear and resignation, Lotus stepped forward and told Gams that they had a wagon ready, loaded with supplies as a precaution, and urged them to leave. The group made their way to the stables while Gams stood guard, watching for any approaching threats. As everyone got into the wagon, Lotus told the warrior they were ready to go, but then he spotted 2 goblins approaching. Having been spotted, Gams told Lotus to get in the wagon immediately as he charged forward, preparing to cut down the monsters in a single blow. He swung down hard with his longsword, but one of the goblins dodged and countered. Gams swung his sword again and this time wounded it badly. After finishing off the monster, Gams told Lotus to get moving and jumped onto the wagon as Lotus drove it at full speed past the barricaded houses. Gams told him the gate would be impassable, but a section of the town's northwestern wall had collapsed, and they could escape through the breach. Lotus nodded and looked ahead, his eyes widening in horror at the gruesome scene before him. The town was engulfed in flames. Monsters were slaughtering the defenseless townspeople, while dark hounds fed on the corpses. Lotus covered his mouth in terror as he heard the desperate cries of his neighbors, but there was nothing they could do but keep fleeing. Gams cut down a goblin riding a boar and pointed to the breach ahead. As Lotus successfully steered the wagon through the breach and into the forbidden forest, the town had fallen and the merciless monsters were burning everything to the ground. Carol's fairy tale book was burned to ashes in what, just hours before, had been her home. Everyone remained silent as the wagon sped along the forest path. Carol broke the silence, asking her mother if they could ever go home again. This caused Kem to turn around, and Layla quietly replied that perhaps, but that many new experiences were waiting for them elsewhere. Kem enthusiastically declared that they had survived thanks to God's divine protection, and that the God of Fate was guiding them. Back in the present, Yoshio's doorbell rang as a delivery person announced a package had arrived. Yoshio opened the door and received another package from Destiny Village, signing for the delivery. Meanwhile, Gams was training Lotus in combat, criticizing his spear thrusts, saying they weren't strong enough to even hurt a monster. The merchant nervously acknowledged it, but his will didn't waver. As Yoshio watched, Lotus dropped to his knees and Gams told him he wasn't suited for the battlefield and should leave the fighting to him and Mulis. He advised Lotus to support them from the rear when the decisive day comes. Lotus sadly realized that he thought every little bit of strength would help, but it seemed he didn't know his place. He apologized to Gams for wasting his time. Yoshio noted that Gams was being quite harsh. Later, as everyone gathered for dinner, Lotus still looked sad and dejected. Layla told Gams they were running low on fruit and asked him to pick some while on patrol, and Gams agreed. Carol immediately jumped in, declaring she wanted to help too, which caught Lotus's attention. Carol said that she hadn't been outside once since they arrived at the cave. Lotus explained that as the day of the evil god's temptation drew near, the monsters were becoming more aggressive, and it was much more dangerous to go outside. Carol brushed off the warning, saying she'd be fine with Gams by her side. When Lotus protested, she simply declared that she would pick lots of delicious fruit. Lotus suddenly slammed his fist on the table, shouting that it was dangerous outside and that she had to listen to him. Everyone fell silent. Layla looked worriedly at her husband, while Kem and Gams lowered their heads and Mulis just kept to himself. Suddenly, Carol burst into tears, and as Layla was about to speak to Lotus, he realized what he had done. Before he could say anything more, Carol ran out in tears, screaming that she hated him and locking herself in her room. After witnessing the whole scene, Yoshio remarked that Lotus was in a really tough spot. All he could do now was try to boost the villagers' morale with prophecies, but that wasn't a fundamental solution to the problem. Thanks to the flow of offerings, Yoshio's destiny points had gradually increased to 214. He thought about using a miracle, like summoning a group of hunters to stay for 3 days, but he feared that no matter how much he reinforced their forces, if those hunters turned out to be savages and harmed the villagers, they would lose everything. Yoshio imagined 3 hunters taking over the cave and realized that if this were a normal game, he probably wouldn't be so worried. He believed the ideal miracle for this situation was to summon a golem. Yoshio daydreamed about controlling a golem to help the villagers, adapting and dealing with any unexpected situations. However, the problem was that he didn't think he could accumulate the necessary 700 points in the next 10 days. He briefly considered asking his parents for money, but he immediately realized that if he borrowed money to spend on a game, he would definitely be kicked out of the house with no chance to argue. Borrowing money from his younger sister was an even more unlikely prospect. Yoshio then thought about selling the offerings he received from the villagers, but hesitated, realizing they were rather vague and he wasn't sure if he could sell them and make money within 10 days. Sighing, he felt stuck and slumped over his desk. Then he looked up and realized there was another way. Quickly opening his laptop and searching for part-time jobs, he realized this was a simple solution for most people, but he had never worked before. He recalled a part-time job interview back in college, but because he was so nervous, he couldn't speak smoothly and quickly failed. Remembering that moment, he realized it wasn't the only reason he'd failed. Back then, he had a strange sense of pride and only wanted to apply for positions with high salaries and good benefits. Although he should have learned his lesson from that, even when he started looking for a full-time job, he made the same mistake and applied to corporations that only targeted graduates from top universities, resulting in the expected rejections. Unable to ignore reality any longer, his father used his connections to introduce him to some companies. But then, he did something that made his father lose face. In his immature mind at the time, he thought that if he failed the interview, it would be an excuse for him not to have to work anymore. That's what he thought back then. 10 years have passed since then. Even though it's a part-time job, he thought he would give it a try this time. He had thought about getting a job many times before, but was always afraid, knowing how weak he was and that he should have known better at his age. Spoiled and used to not having to make any effort, he was terrified by the prospect of trying and being rejected again. His past failures always haunted him, and he didn't want to disappoint anyone anymore. As he scrolled through the job listings, Yoshio realized that people would laugh at him if they knew his motivation for finding a job was just for a game. But he also understood that if he didn't get a job now, there was a high chance he would never change for the rest of his life. If he couldn't help the villagers, then all his efforts would be for nothing. He thought it would be great if there was some short-term job that ended within a month and helped him earn enough money. But part-time jobs at convenience stores usually last at least a few months or even half a year. Moreover, since he rarely talked to anyone besides his family, having to interact with customers seemed like too big of a challenge. There were daily manual labor jobs, but he doubted if he could handle places that required physical strength. There were almost no short-term jobs around him, and although he would have more options if he had a driver's license or a motorcycle, doing nothing until he got one also made finding a job more difficult. Looking at the screen, he saw Lotus trying to apologize to his daughter to no avail as she angrily turned away. His wife gently told him to leave the girl alone for now. Yoshio regained his resolve and changed his clothes, declaring that he would help everyone. Then he sped off on his bicycle, planning to look for job listings in free magazines, pushing himself forward. A while later, he returned home, and his mother was surprised to see he had been out. Then she noticed the job listing magazine he brought back, smiled, and welcomed him home. Back in his room, Yoshio continued his job search until he heard his mother call out that dinner was ready. When he went downstairs, to his surprise, he found the whole family gathered around the dinner table. Yoshio was surprised to see his younger sister was there too, but when she responded, he cheerfully greeted her, which took her by surprise. As the family ate dinner, Sayuki asked her mother if something good had happened, since the meal was more elaborate than usual. Cheerfully, his mother announced that Yoshio was interested in finding a job, causing him to choke in surprise. His sister remarked that he was finally motivated, but Yoshio just explained it was only a part-time job to earn a little money. His father looked at him and said that the motivation didn't matter. What was important was that he had made up his mind. Yoshio was surprised as he had expected his father to demand he find a full-time job. Calling him Big Brother, Sayuki remarked that he had changed recently, wondering if he had a girlfriend. But his mother dismissed it, saying he didn't seem very popular. Although flustered by his mother's response, Yoshio noticed that his sister had called him Big Brother. His father asked if his change of heart had something to do with the village that had been sending them gifts. Yoshio replied that while he was helping with the village's reconstruction, he felt it wasn't right to keep receiving gifts without giving back, so he wanted to do something to repay them. Sayuki looked around in confusion, realizing she was the only one who didn't know what was going on, but her mother gently reminded her it was rude to talk while eating and promised to tell her after dinner. As Yoshio was sitting on the porch, his father approached and asked if he had found a job yet. He replied that he'd found 3 potential options and would call them tomorrow. His father asked if they were short-term jobs, and Yoshio replied that there were some unavoidable tasks in the village at the end of the month, so he could work any time between now and then. His father remarked that he was ready to start right away, even though he used to get angry and procrastinate. He then asked if there were any other requirements. Yoshio admitted he didn't think he could handle customer service, so he was considering something involving manual labor, since that was all he could find in the current situation. Hearing this, his father said he would ask a friend for help. Yoshio was surprised and grateful for the offer, but also feared becoming dependent on his father and missing his chance again. However, his father insisted that no matter how old he would always be his father, and there was no shame in a child accepting help from their parents. Yoshio realized that if he wanted to achieve something, he should use everything he had, including his family, as that was a necessary part of growing up. For some reason, Yoshio suddenly thought of Rodus and his own father, recalling how the shop owner often tried to get his daughter to rely on him for help. He wondered if his own father was trying to convince him to rely on him for support as well. Bowing his head, Yoshio then asked his father for help, and his father turned away, immediately calling his friend. With no turning back, Yoshio trembled with anxiety as his father spoke to his friend. His dad then asked if he could change into more flexible clothes for work. After everything was arranged, his father told Yoshio to be ready in 30 minutes. Yoshio shaved and changed into a tracksuit as the fear of disappointing his father resurfaced. He punched himself to regain his resolve, then turned back to the screen to check on the situation in the village. Lotus sighed in frustration and asked his wife if there was anything he could do to help. She replied that Carol had already taken care of everything for the day, and that ever since she arrived, she's always been proactive in helping everyone. She noted that children really do grow up fast. Suddenly, she realized Lotus had left. He had quickly gone to Carol's side and began to apologize. She apologized as well, revealing that everyone had told her he cherished her more than anything, and that he was only angry because he wanted to protect her. Lotus looked at his daughter with embarrassment as she declared she wouldn't ask to go outside anymore. He knelt down, caressing her cheek, and admitted that because of his own fear, he had forgotten that they had decided to live in this new place together, and that they couldn't keep living in fear. He declared that she was a wonderful member of the village and said that he trusted her, allowing her to do as she wished. This made Carol smile while the others looked on. Getting up from his chair, Yoshio buried his face in his hands and smiled, thanking the villagers for giving him the courage he needed. He told them he would be back, then left the room and went downstairs as the villagers cheered. As his father drove him to the new job, Yoshio asked him what kind of work it was. His father replied that he would be doing cleaning work, as his friend's supermarket was short-staffed on the night shift after a part-timer had recently quit. The friend was also happy because Yoshio was a great fit for the job. Anxiously, Yoshio wondered if a cleaning job was right for him. Arriving at a small supermarket, Yoshio and his father were greeted by a bearded man in work clothes who cheerfully called Yoshio a savior. He clapped him on the shoulder, remarking that even though he'd heard he was a shut-in, he had a strong build. While Yoshio was hoping they would get along well, his father suddenly left. For a moment, Yoshio thought about calling him back, but he thought better of it, realizing he wasn't a child anymore. He was a working man now. Yoshio's new boss let him in and reassured him, saying that he just needed to do as he was told. If there was anything he didn't understand or couldn't do, he should just ask him or the other 2 employees. He then introduced the 2 new colleagues, one man and one woman, and told them not to bully or give Yoshio any weird ideas. The 2 employees shared a laugh and welcomed Yoshio, making him realize that, unlike him, they had very good social skills. Aware that he was just a rookie, he decided to cast aside his useless pride and accept that he'd be clumsy at first, planning to humbly do his best. Yoshio politely greeted his new colleagues and hoped they would get along well. After his first shift, the boss drove him home, asking if he could work the next shift the following day. He explained that it would be a late-night shift, and he would pick him up at 8 p.m. His colleagues congratulated him on finishing the job, and cheerfully waved goodbye as the car drove off. Satisfied, Yoshio entered his house, knowing no one would be awake at this hour. Everyone had been kind and friendly to him during the day, which helped him calm down and complete all his tasks. He had to vacuum up the foamy, dirty water used for mopping the floors, using an industrial vacuum that could suck up both water and gravel. Additionally, he had to move furniture and wash the equipment when he was finished. Yoshio thought the manager must have been mistaken, giving him the most comfortable job. Tired and filthy after a hard night's work, Yoshio wanted to take a bath immediately. But first, he went to the kitchen to get something to drink. When he turned on the light, he was surprised to see a plate of food already prepared, along with a note from his mother congratulating him and telling him to eat. Smiling, Yoshio sat down, peeled off the plastic wrap and took a bite of an onigiri. He realized the food tasted so much better after a hard day's work. He thanked his mother for the meal. As he went upstairs to get changed, he wondered why he had been so afraid of working before. He soon realized the bathroom was already heated, and the hot water had been prepared. He understood his mother had been thinking of him, cleaning the bathroom and saving it just for him. He thanked her in his heart as he soaked in the tub. As the clock neared 3:30 a.m., Yoshio sat in front of his computer screen and decided to check on how the villagers were doing. When he checked the village, he saw that most areas were empty and everyone was asleep in their rooms. Yoshio thought that it was thanks to them he'd been able to persevere through the day. Seeing everyone working hard every day had helped him give it his all. With that thought, he went to bed, wishing them all sweet dreams. The next day, Yoshio woke up with sore muscles, especially his back, which was aching intensely. Knowing he had to work again that night, he wondered if he would be okay. When he went into the kitchen, his mother greeted him and offered to heat up his lunch, but Yoshio insisted on doing it himself. As they sat down to eat together, his mother asked about his job, and he replied that everyone was very nice to him and the work was easy. Yoshio added that he had to go to work around the same time that night. His mother was pleased to see he was trying his best, and Yoshio shyly changed the subject, thanking her for dinner the previous night. His mother teased him, saying he'd become much more well-behaved lately. As he thanked her for the meal, she mentioned that a new package from the village had arrived. He took the package to his room, and based on its size, he guessed it might be from Carol. Upon opening it, he confirmed its origin as he happily took out a lump of dirt. They were supposed to only be able to give him one offering per day, but the reality was different. They could send up to 2 offerings each day, but Carol, with her innocent and relentless imitation of the adults, had unintentionally reduced the number of times the villagers could make offerings to one. She would often send him slightly misshapen, or rather beautiful stones she'd picked up from the riverbank, small white flowers, and even shiny mud dumplings. Recently, Carol had also started imitating the wooden statue of the god of fate carved by Gams, and she began sending him small wooden statues she carved herself, little by little, with each new statue becoming more and more detailed. Seeing Carol carving with a small knife in her hand still made Yoshio nervous. When she finished her latest creation, she approached Mulis, who seemed to be lost in thought, and pulled him out of his thoughts to show off the new statue. The doctor smiled when he realized it was a figure of the god of fate. Carefully, Yoshio placed Carol's clay ball next to the other offerings she had sent him. While to others, these might just be small, worthless items, to Yoshio and Carol, they were treasures. Sent from a virtual world within a game, he wasn't sure if these items were actually handcrafted by company staff or made by the little girl herself. Though he knew it was impossible, he still wanted to believe that these offerings were truly sent by Carol, no matter how absurd others might think it was. Yawning, Yoshio lay down to rest, hoping the muscle aches would subside. As he closed his eyes, Yoshio admitted that he never imagined his mother would be so happy just to see him go to work. He was grateful that he could earn money by helping others. That evening, Yoshio's boss remarked that he was starting to get used to the new job, and advised him not to be so tense. He explained that it's impossible to get used to everything in just 2 days, and assured him that the staff were all good people. He also mentioned the other employee who seemed a bit arrogant, but was actually a very hard worker. Looking at that young man, Yoshio realized that he had also thought he was arrogant at first, but after seeing how quickly and skillfully he worked, he understood that you shouldn't judge someone by their appearance alone. The boss said that the most important thing in this job is hard work, and with that, Yoshio was already an excellent employee. The praise made Yoshio happy, and he thanked him for the recognition. His colleagues then teased the boss with a few jokes. And when the boss replied in kind, Yoshio realized that the work atmosphere here was really relaxed. Yoshio believed he would be able to give his all to this job, and felt lucky that this was his first workplace after returning to a normal life. Returning home after work, he realized there was about a week left until the temptation of the evil gods, so he needed to push himself for the sake of the villagers. Since he had less time to follow the game, he decided to review the day's conversation logs. Reading through them, he imagined the scene as Kem approached Gams, suggesting he take a short break, while Carol chimed in and proposed they both take a nap together, causing the two sisters to bicker. Meanwhile, Gams quietly slipped away. He then moved on to the conversation between Lotus and Layla, where Lotus revealed that Mulis had taught him how to brew an antidote, though he still couldn't guarantee its effectiveness. Unable to fight on the front lines like Gams or the doctor, Lotus wondered if he could help people in other ways, which made his wife hug him tightly and call him an incredibly dependable husband. Yoshio felt happy that the villagers were still living optimistically each day, despite their anxiety about the temptation of the evil gods. But as he moved to the next conversation, his eyes widened in shock. He heard a voice reporting on the villagers, describing them as just ordinary refugees with no significant threat, and promised to return after further observation. The voice said that even without taking action, the villagers would likely die in the temptation of the evil gods, just like the humans and dwarves who had lived here before. Yoshio couldn't see the speaker's name because they weren't a villager, but this voice was concerned that the village was protected by the god of fate, and that they would face his wrath if they made a wrong move. Therefore, the speaker believed they should continue to observe and not intervene directly. Yoshio was shocked when he realized the spy was none other than Mulis, as the doctor's name appeared. Yoshio never suspected Mulis was a spy. He had thought Mulis was a trustworthy doctor, but now he understood why he was only considered a guest character instead of an ally. Through the conversation, Yoshio realized that Mulis was a member of a tribe living in the forest, who had been wary of the villagers ever since they appeared. However, thanks to the protection of the god of fate, Mulis did not intend to act directly against them. Yoshio realized that his existence had helped the villagers significantly. However, if he couldn't rely on Mulis in battle, then Gams would be the only one who could face the monsters in the temptation of the evil gods. He wondered what to do next, but realized it was already late. Yoshio decided he would issue a prophecy the next day, hinting that he knew Mulis's true identity to warn him to change his mind and not do anything dangerous. The next morning, as the villagers and Mulis gathered for breakfast, Yoshio sent them a new prophecy from his deity. Kem excitedly announced that they had received a prophecy today when she saw her Bible glowing. Yoshio apologized for disturbing them during breakfast and explained that this was an emergency. He told them to try to endure the temptation of the evil gods, promising to use his miraculous power to help them in part, while also reminding them that they were still under his divine protection. Yoshio concluded the prophecy by reminding them that anyone who endangered them would face his judgment. Mulis looked around nervously but tried to act calm when Kem asked about his worried expression. Yoshio realized that Mulis was genuinely afraid of the power of the god of fate. Gams cheerfully declared that they could overcome this challenge with the god's help, but still advised everyone to do their best, because the gods hate laziness. Gams's words struck Yoshio like a sharp jab. He felt relieved, believing he had temporarily stopped Mulis from any unnecessary interference. Now Yoshio turned back to the problem of the villagers' combat strength. Yoshio realized that his only option was to rely on summoning golems, and felt a thrill of excitement imagining joining Gams in battle, controlling a golem with his own hands. To do that, he'd have to work for another week to save up enough for the missing 350 fate points. That evening, the car picked him up for work once again. As he got into the car, Yoshio noticed that his coworker Yamamoto wasn't there. The woman they worked with said that Yamamoto wasn't feeling well and had called in sick. The boss announced that the three of them would be cleaning a smaller store than usual, so they would finish earlier, and praised Yoshio as a lifesaver for coming into work with them. After getting home earlier than expected, Yoshio found his parents in the kitchen. His mother complained that he hadn't told her he'd be home early. Otherwise, the whole family could have had dinner together. Yoshio explained that he got home early because the job started in the late afternoon, and the finishing time depended on their work pace. His mother seemed disappointed, but she quickly turned around cheerfully to heat up some food for him. Seeing his mother in such a good mood, he thought about asking his father if something was up, but he couldn't muster the confidence to say it. Deciding to try and break the silence, he wanted to thank his father for helping him get the job. But before he could say anything, his mother announced that his meal was ready, and as he ate, Yoshio noticed that his mother seemed to be giving off an aura that practically begged him to ask what had happened, which made him feel pressured. Finally, he decided to ask. As his mother started to say something about his father, the man awkwardly cut her off, saying that her favorite show was about to start, which surprised Yoshio. Back in his room, Yoshio felt an overwhelming sense of fatigue. figuring that being trusted by his boss and told he was being relied on had made him a little too enthusiastic. Yawning, he thought he would fall asleep the moment he lay down, but he decided to check on the villager's situation before sleeping. He saw Carol sleeping soundly while Gams and Kem were getting ready to do the same. Laudis and Layla looked like they were about to have an intimate moment in the kitchen. Mulis was lying on his bed, staring at the ceiling, seemingly lost in thought. Yoshio wondered what the doctor was thinking, assuming he might be observing whether the villagers would leave before the temptation of the evil god arrived. Considering Mulis's presence made the villagers feel safer, Yoshio decided he couldn't force him to leave and chose to watch him carefully, even though it was still relatively early. Yoshio realized it had been a long time since he'd felt sleepy while doing something. He planned to go to bed, but before he did, he discovered a button with the kanji for real. Yoshio remembered what happened when he pressed the dream bubble on Gams, and decided to press the real button before sleeping. As expected, the screen changed completely, and he was surprised to see a modern house. As he zoomed in to explore different parts of the house, he began to recognize the familiar layout of the rooms, until he suddenly realized he was looking at his own house. Unable to understand this, he wondered how to get back to the original game. Accidentally, he looked into the bathroom and saw his sister taking a bath, muttering a wish that her chest could be a little bigger. Yoshio thought that if this were real, his sister would definitely kill him. He comforted himself that this must just be a dream, that he must have fallen asleep while playing Village of Fate. Then, he saw his parents in the living room and thought it would be okay to eavesdrop on their conversation since it was just a dream. His father told his mother not to mention it in front of Yoshio, but his mother said it was fine, because his father had given her a wedding anniversary gift for the first time in years and she wanted to brag about it. Yoshio didn't know it was his parents' wedding anniversary and he felt a little embarrassed witnessing their relationship. His father then said he was honored that she liked the gift and apologized for being so distant for the past 10 years. Yoshio's mother remarked that his father had stopped smiling since that day, asking if he was worried about Yoshio. His face fell when he heard his father admit it was true, feeling as if those words were a thorn piercing his heart, even if it was just a dream. Looking back, Yoshio remembered he had been much more composed before becoming a shut-in. Although he was still as quiet as ever, he always gave his all in everything, even once pulling a muscle from being too enthusiastic during a father-son relay race. When Yoshio didn't understand something in his studies, his father would always explain it in a way that was easy to grasp. And whenever he cried because his mother got angry with him, his father would secretly give him an ice cream and stay by his side until he stopped crying. Yoshio wondered why he had forgotten such precious moments. Before, he had always been under the impression that his father was a strict and cold person. He didn't want to accept that he was the one who caused the family to grow distant, so he subconsciously altered his memories to suit his own ego. And although he continued to live a withdrawn life, those distorted memories remained buried deep in his heart. Yoshio slammed his fist on the table in regret and remorse, but his mother remarked that he had found a job now and looked brighter. His father replied that he was truly relieved and had always wanted to apologize to him since that day. Yoshio was surprised to hear this, well aware that he also had many things to apologize for, but he didn't think his father needed to apologize to him. His mother realized that his father was referring to an argument they had before, something he had never forgotten. Back then, he had yelled that Yoshio wasn't trying hard enough, and that anyone could find a job as long as they were serious. Those words had shocked Yoshio as he thought he had been serious about his job search. Yoshio's mother laughed, remarking how those words were a complete contrast to his father's relaxed attitude back in college. When he was a party animal who played around so much, his grades were just barely passing. Yoshio couldn't reconcile this image with his strict father, feeling it was too absurd even for a dream. Yoshio's father admitted that if his past self still existed today, he would surely be even worse than Yoshio. He explained that the environment was much more lenient back then, with companies practically begging people to come work for them. He added that Yoshio was a more diligent student than he had been, and had tried his best to find a job, while he himself had only goofed off, ignored his own faults, and acted high and mighty with his son, even though he had no right to. He trembled as he spoke these words, trying to fulfill his role as a father, thinking he had lived an honest life. But in reality, the burden he carried was greater than he could handle. As a result, he mistakenly believed he had become a role model, and lectured his son without considering his own past. He felt like a terrible person. He had never really studied properly, but he couldn't stand his own mother, who always forced him to study, so he didn't push his own children to study much either. But the truth was, he was no different from her. At this, Yoshio broke down in tears, tremblingly saying that his father was wrong. Regardless of his past, he had always admired his father. He had seemed so serious in the past, while he himself was always trying to keep up with his hardworking father, who always gave his all in everything. His mother took his father's hand, affirming that he had always been a wonderful person, both then and now, and advised him to let some of the pressure off his shoulders. Yoshio realized that even though his parents were kind adults with grown children, they were just older people with a little more experience than their kids. That didn't mean they were always perfect. Yoshio's father wiped his tears, admitting he used to think adults had to be role models. His mother suggested they should think of themselves as people who are still growing. And just as their son was trying to change, they also needed to change from now on. As his parents held hands affectionately, Yoshio cried with relief. Even knowing this was just a dream, he was so happy to see his parents sharing the kind of feelings he had expected adults to have. He realized they also worried and carried more than they could handle, and his heart felt lighter. The next morning, Yoshio woke up in front of his computer, smiling as he confirmed it was all just a dream, and didn't feel sad about it at all. As he walked downstairs, he felt that from that day on, he could talk honestly with his parents like before. When he opened the door, he cheerfully wished his family a good morning. Yoshio panted as he ran at full speed down the street. It was November 30th, the day of the temptation of the evil gods. It was now 1 a.m., and Yoshio was trying to run home as fast as he could to get in front of his computer. He wondered how things had ended up like this. On November 28th, 2 days ago, Yoshio was glued to his computer screen, watching the villagers go about their daily lives. He was determined to watch them carefully until it was time for work. Everyone seemed to be getting ready for the temptation of the evil gods. The girls were preparing food and supplies while Gams and Lotus reinforced the defensive fence. The villagers had rebuilt the fence to eliminate any gaps, making it sturdier, and installed a simple watchtower to give them a vantage point from inside the walls. Mulis was crouched on top of the watchtower, carefully observing the surroundings, when he suddenly spotted some movement in the forest. Mulis stood up straight, drew his bow, and nocked an arrow, aiming at a black dog that was approaching Gams and Lotus from the bushes as they focused on repairing the wall. The monster growled in the bushes, ready to pounce. Sensing the danger, the doctor immediately drew his bowstring taut and fired the arrow, hitting the black dog right in the throat. Yoshio noted that the watchtower was perfect for Mulis, and Lotus waved his thanks to him for the timely intervention. Mulis was still staying in the cave, but Yoshio wondered when he would leave. He couldn't imagine Mulis intended to fight alongside them against the temptation of the evil gods. He guessed that Mulis would probably flee during the chaos of the monster attack. The temptation of the evil gods was Yoshio's first major raid event. Although in a normal game, this introductory event would have a low difficulty setting, Yoshio was fully aware that the fate of this village was no ordinary game. This was a harsh game where failure was not an option. As he watched everyone's progress, Yoshio was glad to see the villagers actively checking and reinforcing their defenses. If failure were to happen in the game, however rare, he could easily see himself falling into despair, losing half his will to live, and returning to his old life as a NEET, not in education, employment, or training. Determined not to let that happen, he not only wanted to ensure the village's development, but also didn't want to lose the progress he had made in his own life. Currently, Yoshio had 540 destiny points. He could earn more points using his daily wages from his part-time job. After adding a little more, he would have enough for the 700 points needed to perform the golem summoning miracle. With that, he could provide reliable support for the villagers after Mulis left. Most importantly, he could control the golem himself, which was the biggest advantage. Without trying to sound arrogant, Yoshio recalled that he had played numerous games over the past decade, from Tetris to Street Fighter and first-person shooters, and had a reasonable level of confidence in his control skills, whatever they might be. His work for the month would end late that evening, and he had to prepare thoroughly to be ready for the temptation of the evil gods. The next day, as night began to fall upon the village, Kem tended to the altar while Gams prepared his weapons. Carol approached the warrior, grabbing his sleeve and asking if they would be safe. With a reassuring smile, Gams told the little girl that they had reinforced the defenses, so even if the monsters appeared, they would be fine. Seizing the opportunity, Carol hugged Gams's arm and playfully asked him to protect her, which angered Kem from behind. The priestess immediately scolded the little girl, reminding her that Gams wasn't Carol's brother, but hers. Carol called Kem her stepsister while continuing to talk to Gams, ignoring the reprimand. Kem quickly returned to the main issue, asking if they could survive the attack in their current state. While Lotus recalled the events of their previous village, his eyes contemplative as silence filled the cave. Mulis broke the silence, reminding everyone that this place was called the Forbidden Forest, a dangerous place, home to many different species of monsters. Mulis also tried to distance himself from the day of the evil god's temptation and apologized for what might happen. Kem replied that the fact he had helped them this much was more than enough, emphasizing that Mulis's support had been invaluable. If he didn't know the truth, Yoshio probably would have admired him as a kind and trustworthy doctor. But unfortunately, he knew better about Mulis's true nature. Gams also pointed out that even if they decided to leave, the carriage's wheels were nearly broken, and they lacked the skills to repair them. Leaving the forest on foot was impossible. Mulis confirmed this, noting that if it were just him or him and Gams, an escape might be possible, but with others accompanying them, he couldn't be sure of success. Hearing that, Gams stood up, held his head high, and clenched his fist, declaring with all his determination that they would have to fight the monsters no matter what, as it was their only chance of survival. Yoshio noticed that Gams was going to give it his all and rally everyone to survive together. With the exception of Mulis, everyone looked at each other with renewed hope, and Yoshio recognized how dependable Gams was. The warrior then turned to Mulis, bowing his head to thank him for everything he had done, while also saying that although a part of him wanted Mulis to fight alongside them, he didn't want to force him to join against his will. Mulis was left speechless by this display of gratitude, especially when all the other villagers also bowed their heads to thank him. Yoshio realized that everyone seemed to have sensed the day Mulis would leave the village was coming. The doctor asked everyone to raise their heads, admitting that he should have been the one to speak up first. He said that he truly wanted to help everyone, but because he had a family and important people waiting for him, he had planned to leave the village that evening, leaving behind some prepared herbs for them to use when needed. Carol stepped forward and asked the doctor if he was really leaving, and Mulis apologized while stroking the little girl's hair. She then asked him to come back and play with them again, and he just smiled. Yoshio silently remarked that he still couldn't figure out what kind of person Mulis really was. Yoshio felt that although Mulis was tasked by his own village to monitor the villagers, he wasn't doing it with his whole heart. Even if Mulis couldn't fight alongside the villagers, he bore them no ill will, or at least that's what Yoshio wanted to believe. As he lay back and stretched, the young man realized it was almost time for work and quickly ran downstairs, promising to be back. At the supermarket, Yoshio worked hard alongside his colleagues, vacuuming and cleaning the floors. The vacuum cleaner grew heavier as it sucked up more liquid from the floor. The boss used the polisher, while Misaki scraped off stains for Yoshio to vacuum up, and Yamamoto mopped and polished the floor. When they took a break, Yamamoto handed Yoshio a bottle of milk tea and started a conversation. Though nervous, Yoshio tried to give a polite answer but felt a bit embarrassed by how it came out. Yamamoto laughed and told him to just talk casually, but Yoshio showed deference, saying Yamamoto was his senior. Despite that, Yamamoto accepted it and said he'd look forward to when Yoshio felt comfortable enough to speak more naturally. Then, Yamamoto turned his attention to the mobile game he was playing, remembering he had a free gacha pull to do each day. Yoshio noted that Yamamoto was a true gamer, buying every console title he could, and even visiting an internet cafe weekly for competitions. When Yamamoto asked if he played any mobile games, Yoshio replied that he didn't, because he used to be a shut-in. He also pointed out that using a PC was probably better in that situation anyway. What surprised Yoshio was that Yamamoto's attitude didn't change after learning he had been a shut-in. In fact, Yamamoto even shared that he had gone through a similar phase himself and spoke about it so casually, as if it were no big deal. This significantly improved Yoshio's impression of Yamamoto. When Yamamoto asked about interesting games, he started talking about a game with gorgeous graphics that he was hooked on. But before he could remember the game's name, their boss told them both to get back to work. As he continued his tasks, Yoshio told himself that he didn't have time to play any game other than Village of Fate. After a night of work, Yoshio's boss dropped him off in front of his house and said he'd be free for the last 2 days of November, but would be called back for extra work during the big year-end cleaning. Yoshio thanked everyone and waved as the van drove away. Back in his room, Yoshio turned on the monitor and confirmed that Mulis had left the cave, leaving a neat row of medicine vials and instructions on the table. Smiling, he remarked that the doctor wasn't a bad person after all, and felt reassured thinking that he might come back if the village survived the evil god's temptation. On November 29th, a weary Gam stood guard on the watchtower, while Lyra and Lotus anxiously did their chores and Kem prayed fervently before the altar. Sensing the tense atmosphere, Yoshio wondered if there was anything he could do to help them relax. He considered writing a reassuring prophecy, and immediately Kem's holy book began to glow. In the prophecy, the god of fate reminded the villagers of his protection in times of danger, promising to help them if they faced a real threat. Yoshio believed that this way, the villagers wouldn't become too dependent on the god and would keep their spirits high, while also preparing for the golem's assistance. Yoshio felt relieved when Kem announced that they had received divine protection, lifting the villagers' spirits. Hope was rekindled, and the tense atmosphere in the village eased somewhat. Yoshio leaned back, satisfied that everything was going according to plan. Although he was eager to test out controlling the golem he had summoned, he still wasn't sure about the conditions or method for controlling the creature. Therefore, he decided to save the golem for an emergency. With nothing urgent left to do for the day, Yoshio briefly considered taking a nap, but then decided to go downstairs for lunch. He grilled some mysterious meat and had some strange fruit for dessert. Yoshio savored the delicious meal, noting that his whole family's health had improved significantly since they started eating the offerings sent by the village. After hearing the phone ring, he picked it up and realized it was his boss. After being reassured, his boss informed him about a sudden job that had just come up. Yoshio thought that he only needed to monitor the villagers that day, so he asked his boss what time the job would end. When he learned the job was expected to finish at 9 p.m., he decided to accept. His boss happily called him a savior, saying that Yamamoto had suddenly requested time off, which made Yoshio wonder if something had happened, believing that perhaps Yamamoto just wanted to relax a bit. Yoshio felt this was a fair trade-off and accepted the job. Late that night, Yoshio's boss was arguing with the owner of the shop they were cleaning as he tried to negotiate more details of the contract, hoping to extend the cleaning time. Yoshio looked at the clock, worried as the hands pointed to 9:15 p.m. Even though his boss told him he could leave, he insisted on staying to finish the job, believing it would be over quickly. However, at 12:37 a.m., Yoshio was still stuck in traffic, and a police officer told his boss to turn the car around due to an accident. With the temptation of the evil gods underway, Yoshio feared the monsters had already begun their attack and might have wiped out all the villagers. Desperate, Yoshio told his boss he would get home on foot, bidding his boss farewell with a smile before dashing home, lamenting his bad luck as he ran. By 1:23 a.m., Yoshio was panting, his body exhausted after running seriously for the first time in years. Thinking of the villagers, he tried to push through the pain and mustered all his strength. Racing home in the hope of saving them in time, Yoshio was still gasping for breath when he got home, quickly taking off his shoes and running upstairs. He shouted, asking if everyone was okay, but despite being scared to death, he saw no signs of a monster attack. Gams was still standing guard while the others were sound asleep. Yoshio breathed a sigh of relief. Suddenly, his sister called out from the doorway, complaining about the noise he was making. He apologized and promised to be quiet, but his sister stared at him, remarking that he smelled of sweat, and his uniform was filthy, suggesting he take a shower. Embarrassed, Yoshio turned away, promising to shower right away. When he checked on the villagers, he saw that Lotus had taken over guard duty from Gams. The girls remained vigilant, with Kem praying for the protection of the god of fate. Yoshio wanted the monsters to attack, but at the same time, he hoped the day would pass peacefully. Eventually, Yoshio started to doze off, jolting awake in a panic, and planning to make coffee to stay alert. Suddenly, he sensed something in the forest. Gam scanned the area before leaping down from the watchtower. A warning cry rang out as the temptation of the evil gods began. Gams picked up his spear, peered through a hole in the wall, and saw 5 black dogs advancing toward the village. Instantly, Yoshio remembered their poisonous fangs, but didn't believe they could easily break into the village. As they turned back, Yoshio wondered if the monsters would give up and retreat. But one of the creatures suddenly sped up and charged straight for the wall. The monster made it past the row of sharp stakes, and was immediately struck by Gam's spear, falling to the ground as Yoshio cheered him on. The remaining 4 immediately charged into attack, leaping over the fence at the same time. The first 2 were taken down by Gam's spear, while the survivor tried to get past but was also quickly cut down by the warrior's sword. The last hound circled around behind Gams, and he drew his second sword, slid down and slashed the monster from below, sending it rolling away, blood pouring from the wound. Yoshio was ecstatic, marveling at how strong and amazing Gams was. Just then, Kem and Carol came out of the cave to praise him, but Gams immediately warned them to get back, fearing another wave of attacks. Lotus climbed the watchtower and saw no sign of the monsters, believing everything was fine. A worried Layla appeared, warning her husband not to be so reckless. Sighing, Gams asked Kem and Carol for help, and the two girls eagerly jumped in but started arguing with each other, until Gams revealed that he needed their help to throw the monsters' corpses over the fence. Their faces quickly turned from excitement to horror. Lotus then joined Gams in the cleanup duty, while Layla told the girls to help her with chores inside as the boys cleared the front yard. Yoshio felt relieved that the first wave of attacks had been repelled, telling himself that maybe they wouldn't need the golem to win after all. 4 hours after the evil god's temptation began, Gams was resting by the watchtower after successfully stopping another attack, while Kem brought him some water. The black hounds and ferocious boars had been attacking relentlessly, but the fence Gams had instructed the villagers to build earlier helped them survive without too much trouble. Unlike the black hounds, the boars weren't strong enough to jump over the fence, and the sharp stakes were planted at the exact height of their foreheads, causing them to impale themselves when they charged the wall. The black hounds, on the other hand, were easily taken down by Gams as they tried to jump the fence. That attack happened at 5:30 p.m., and Yoshio had been carefully noting the exact times the attacks occurred. He noticed that new waves usually appeared about 30 or 60 minutes after the previous one was wiped out, and the number of enemies increased with each passing hour. These were probably hourly events. So far, Gams had survived with only minor injuries, but Yoshio worried that if the attacks kept coming, no matter how skilled he was, Gams would eventually run out of stamina. He decided he would prioritize adding more warriors once they survived the evil god's temptation. While Lotus repaired the fence and Layla gave Carol food to take to Gams, Yoshio decided to take a break and get some food and water for himself. As he grabbed some snacks and was about to head back to his room, his mom asked if he was going to eat with them. Yoshio replied that he couldn't leave the computer right then and would eat upstairs, despite his mom revealing that she was making his favorite fried chicken. As he walked up the stairs, he thought about how fried chicken is best, right after it's cooked, and promised himself he'd find time to bring some up to his room when it was done. When the clock struck 7 p.m., Lotus looked up at the watchtower in a panic and warned of a new attack. Consisting of 4 black hounds and 3 ferocious boars, this was the first time Yoshio had seen a combined attack, and as Gams ordered Lotus into the cave, he told Gams not to push himself too hard. Gams picked up his spear, declaring that the only way to beat them was to go all out. The boars slammed into the spiked wall while the black hounds leaped over the fence. 2 of them were immediately skewered by Gams' spear, and he quickly turned to face the 2 survivors. But just as he finished them off, Gams heard a loud crash as the wall shattered under the force of the boars' attack. The defenses had been breached. Yoshio briefly considered summoning the golem, but hesitated because there were still 5 hours left in the day. Gams roared, picked up another spear, and faced the charging boars. Suddenly, he planted the spear into the ground and used it as a pole to vault over the monsters' heads. Drawing the knife from his belt, Gams threw it accurately into the skull of a wild boar. He picked up another spear, braced himself, and raised his weapon as the last wild boar charged at him. With a decisive thrust, the spear plunged deep into the monster's head. Yoshio joyfully celebrated this perfect victory, declaring that even men would fall before Gams' strength, let alone Carol and Chem. Looking at the fence, Gams stated that he needed to fix the broken section, but Lotus immediately appeared and took on the task, telling him he should rest because if Gams fell, everyone would die. Layla told her daughter to hug Gams tightly to keep him there, and the little girl happily obliged. Lotus then asked Kem to help him carry the rope and nails, and also asked for help from his wife. Yoshio nodded in agreement, silently noting that Lotus was also a good and reliable man. As the second night wore on, Gams rested while his sister prayed, and Lotus and his family finished repairing the fence. Yoshio predicted that the next wave of attacks would come soon, but his eyes widened in horror when he spotted a large group of monsters heading towards the camp, counting more than 20 creatures. The alarm was raised as Gams sensed the approaching monsters and told everyone to get inside the cave quickly. As they hurried to comply, a notification appeared on Yoshio's screen, informing him that this would be the final wave of attacks, which fired him up even more. This final wave consisted not only of wild boars and black dogs, but also the grotesque humanoid creatures that had attacked the carriage at the very beginning of the game. Yoshio clicked on them, preparing for the final battle. Yoshio confirmed that they were called green goblins, One goblin began to chop down the sharp stakes that had been set up to stop the ferocious boars. Yoshio realized they had intelligence because they were shaped like humans. Behind the wall, Gams gripped 2 spears, bracing himself as the fence groaned and finally collapsed. Monsters began to pour through the gap, and a fierce boar charged straight at Gams, sending him flying in pain. Seeing this from behind the cave door, Kem cried out in alarm as she saw her brother struggling to get up, surrounded by the horde of monsters. Kem opened the door and rushed out, begging her brother to get up, but Lotus managed to hold her back, telling her she had to stay calm. While Layla tried to reassure her that there was nothing she could do even if she went out, Carol trembled in fear as the situation grew dire. Yoshio realized this was no time to just stand by and watch. He immediately activated the golem summoning spell, and the screen flashed brightly, momentarily blinding him. When he looked again, he realized he was now controlling the golem's point of view. Remembering the way to the cave entrance, he grabbed the controller, familiarizing himself with the command buttons on the screen, and began to move the golem. Yoshio noticed the golem was holding a sword. As the golem stepped towards the cave entrance, he saw the villagers huddled by the small door, their expressions filled with confusion. They all stared as the golem rushed past them, and Yoshio boldly declared that he would save Gams. Kem watched in stunned silence, unable to believe her eyes as the embodiment of the god of fate entered the battle. Outside, Gams stood before the cave entrance, a blood-soaked sword in hand, trying to cut down as many monsters as he could, and bravely declaring that he wouldn't let them pass, even if it meant sacrificing himself. A green goblin leaped from behind, choking him, but he still managed to stab his knife into its head. As another goblin charged, Gams, exhausted, closed his eyes and waited for the worst. Suddenly, he felt a strong gust of wind and opened his eyes to see the green goblin's arm being severed and the creature sent flying. He stared in amazement at the massive figure of the golem standing before him. Yoshio told Gams to leave the rest of the fight to him. 2 black dogs attacked simultaneously, but the golem quickly cut them down with a single swing of its sword. Yoshio was ecstatic, thrilled that he had saved his fate points to summon the golem, and thanks to observing the battles all day, he understood the enemy's attack patterns and movements. Yoshio easily carved a path through the charging monsters, cutting them down swiftly as he advanced. Although he was getting used to the controls, Yoshio thought it would be easier if he could use the golem in a third-person view, where he could see the entire character. After noticing the button to change the camera angle, he clicked it and saw the golem's form for the first time. Contrary to the crude stone figure he had been imagining for the past few days, the golem looked exactly like a human, wearing a robe tied at the waist and armored hands. Its long hair was tied in a ponytail, and it held a blood-stained sword. Yoshio was surprised by how different the golem's appearance was from what he had imagined, but at the same time, he recognized something familiar about it. He suddenly realized that the golem was created from the wooden statue that Gams and Kem had carved to worship at the altar. This meant that the golem was truly the embodiment of the god of fate. After a moment, the golem stood alone before the shattered fence, amidst the pile of monster corpses it had just slain. Lotus and Kem helped Gams to his feet, while everyone else looked at their savior with a mixture of awe and caution. Yoshio's screen suddenly displayed a notification stating that the temptation of the evil god had ended, and there would be no more attacks that day. This made Yoshio cheer with excitement. Kem looked at the golem with teary eyes, remarking on its majestic and imposing presence, and expressing deep gratitude to the god who had saved them in their time of need. The other villagers also joined in, thanking the god of fate for saving them. Carol excitedly recounted to everyone the statue's speed as if she couldn't believe her own eyes. Although Yoshio understood this was just how the game was programmed, being thanked and praised so much by the villagers made him feel a bit awkward playing the role of their god. Yoshio realized he should respond to the villagers now, but noticed the golem wasn't moving, making him wonder if it was broken. Then, he was surprised to see a notification pop up on his screen, explaining the golem's mechanics. Operating the creature consumed fate points every second, and it would be deactivated when the points ran out. He could only activate it once per day. Yoshio was shocked by the cost and realized in a panic that using the golem had consumed tens of thousands of yen in just a short time. Although he intended to contribute to the village's development through the golem, he understood that from now on he couldn't use it as easily as he thought. However, seeing the joyful villagers made Yoshio smile too. He raised his hand high, declared victory, and shouted Bond's eye, psyching himself up to be happier. Then he decided to inform the villagers that there would be no more attacks for the rest of the day. The holy book glowed as the prophecy was delivered to the devout villagers. After celebrating the news, they worked together to carry the statue of the god of fate back to its altar and bowed their heads in prayer. Yoshio praised the villagers for their efforts and told them to rest peacefully. After that, he zoomed out to check the area around the cave. Seeing the aftermath of the battle, he realized that even though this was a game, the corpses of the defeated monsters didn't just disappear. He figured whoever had to clean them up later would have a tough time. His eyes then landed on an arrow stuck in the neck of a ferocious wild boar, and he smiled, realizing that Mulus had been silently helping the villagers from a distance with his bow. A few days later, Yamamoto apologized to Yoshio for what happened at the end of last month, when he suddenly took the day off, saying that thanks to him, he was truly saved. As they got drinks from the vending machine, Yoshio reassured him that he was also busy on the last day of the month, so he couldn't have covered for Yamamoto even if he wanted to. Relieved, Yamamoto offered to buy him a drink, and after some thought, Yoshio chose a hot milk tea. As Yamamoto got the drinks, Yoshio asked about his sudden day off. Scratching his head sheepishly, Yamamoto asked him to keep it a secret from the boss, which Yoshio happily agreed to, thinking it was probably a date. Yamamoto then revealed it was for a limited-time event in a game, remarking that, as a fellow gamer, Yoshio would understand. Yoshio gave a forced laugh at the unexpected answer, then asked sympathetically if it was a rare event. Reassured that Yoshio wasn't mad, Yamamoto went on about the game he was addicted to, explaining there was a surprise event at the end of the month that he had been preparing for days. Yoshio realized this end-of-month event sounded all too similar to what he had just experienced in Village of Fate. Yoshio asked Yamamoto if the game he played involved town building or role-playing, but Yamamoto declared he disliked those kinds of games because they lacked excitement, and instead, he focused solely on PvP fighting games. Yoshio breathed a sigh of relief hearing that, thinking to himself that Yamamoto's game had nothing to do with Village of Fate, and that while he had to kill to protect the village, his enemies were only monsters. He replied that he'd tried PvP games but wasn't very good at them, which seemed to disappoint Yamamoto a little, who said he had wanted to recommend some titles if Yoshio was into that genre. Taking a sip of his hot milk tea, Yamamoto remarked that getting this excited about games during a break was also pretty fun. That night, during his break, Yoshio saw that the villagers seemed to have finished cleaning up the monster corpses and were making good progress on repairing the fence. He decided to check the day's chat log, starting with a conversation between Lotus and Gams. The merchant was reminding the warrior to rest, pointing out the injuries he'd sustained during the evil god's temptation, even though Kem had used healing magic on him. Despite this, Gams insisted he was in charge of heavy labor, and continued to work tirelessly, ignoring Kem's pleas for him not to overdo it. Carol quickly pushed Kem aside, eagerly offering to give Gams a massage, causing the two girls to start arguing. Kem told Carol not to interrupt while she was talking to her brother, but Carol retorted that Gams would surely prefer talking to her. Kem turned to Layla, expressing disbelief that could be true. Luckily, Layla intervened just in time, asking the two girls to help her with her work, freeing Gams from the awkward situation. Yoshio smiled, noting that all the villagers were very hardworking. Although his fate points had dropped to 0 after summoning the golem, they had already climbed back to nearly 100, thanks to the villagers' gratitude toward their god. Since they planned to send him a portion of the monster meat from the battle, Yoshio also hoped to receive another boost in fate points from the offerings. Satisfied with the current progress, he decided to go downstairs to eat some meat and clear out the fridge in preparation for the upcoming offerings. As he was standing in the kitchen, Sayuki returned from working overtime, and the smell of meat sizzling on the pan filled the air. He offered to make an extra portion for his sister, and she happily accepted, drawn in by the delicious aroma. Yoshio enthusiastically turned back to the stove, and after a moment he handed Sayuki a plate of mysterious, delicious-looking meat. Sayuki happily thanked him and joked that she wanted to kiss him to show her gratitude, which startled Yoshio, who quickly dodged away when he realized she'd been drinking. They sat down at the kitchen table, said thanks for the meal, and began to eat. While they ate, Sayuki seemed very cheerful, but Yoshio noticed she'd come home quite late and asked if she was okay. She reassured him, saying her job was fun and easy, but then she suddenly looked down as if something was wrong. Yoshio told her he would listen if something was wrong, because even though he might be a hopeless older brother, sharing her troubles might make her feel better. After a moment of silence, Sayuki confessed that lately she'd felt like someone was following her, or at least felt like she was being stared at. Recently, when she was shopping at the convenience store, she felt a man staring intently at her from the aisles. When she turned to see who it was, the person left the store. At first she thought it was just her imagination, but she was sure that man had been following her. Yoshio recalled the incident from 10 years ago when a stalker had followed Sayuki and stabbed him when he confronted the guy. He confessed that the incident had always been on his mind and that he'd been worried ever since she started coming home late these days. His sister was surprised by his concern, but Yoshio explained that no matter what, he was still her big brother. Sayuki looked a little embarrassed, glancing away before confessing that she thought he hated her for how she'd acted before. Yoshio said he thought it was only natural for his little sister to hate him, though he felt ashamed to admit it. Looking up with newfound joy, Sayuki called him Big Brother and remarked that he was slowly becoming his old self again, maybe even a little better and cooler looking. Yoshio was surprised by her words and even more surprised to see his sister bow her head in embarrassment. He understood this was a sign that she was happy with his change and told her to contact him whenever she finished work late so he could pick her up. He took out the smartphone his mom had given him and showed it to Sayuki, and they exchanged phone numbers. Sayuki asked if this meant she could ask for his help when she was in trouble, and he confirmed she could, though he wouldn't be able to help when he was busy with his cleaning job at night. She thanked him and reminded him not to be as reckless as last time, and he agreed. Although Sayuki appeared calm, Yoshio could see she was truly terrified on the inside, and he was determined to do something to protect her this time. After a successful night's work at the store, Yoshio was heading home in the van with his colleagues. They remarked that work had ended earlier than usual today, but Yoshio was lost in thought, staring out the window. Then he turned to his boss and said he needed to stop by the convenience store to buy a few things, so he would get off there. His boss stopped the van to let him off, and Misaki and Yamamoto said their goodbyes as the van drove away, leaving Yoshio alone at the bus stop. Yoshio saw a businesswoman heading home from work, and a group of young men drinking and smoking near some trash cans. Wary but determined, he entered the convenience store. As he picked out a few items, he was bothered by the thought that Sayuki's stalker might be somewhere nearby. He realized his sister must be incredibly stressed about this too. Remembering the time he was stabbed, Yoshio recalled the period he had to spend in the hospital after the incident. Although he was lucky that there were no lasting effects on his body, he still remembered the sight of Sayuki crying constantly by his side. Even though that stalker was sent to a juvenile detention center for assault, both Yoshio and Sayuki received many apology letters from him. But they were all empty apologies that didn't really mean anything. He never heard any news about the guy after he was released, and he didn't want to. Still, Yoshio wondered why the situation was happening again now. As he was walking home with a bag of groceries in his hand, Yoshio saw a woman struggling to bend down and pick something up off the ground. As she leaned against a chair, her left leg injured, trying to reach for her house keys. As he got closer, he recognized her and called out Sakia's name, offering to help her pick up the keys. The woman thanked him, surprised to see Yoshio again. Sakia was his childhood friend who lived right next door, and they had grown up together since birth. Their friendship lasted from elementary school all the way through university, but since then, Sakia had landed her dream job at a company, while Yoshio became a NEET. Even though he became a shut-in, Sakia still sent him emails and visited him for the first few years. But ashamed of his situation, he never tried to return her kindness. This was the first time the two of them had met in 10 years. After a long pause, Yoshio rubbed his eyes and asked about her leg. Sakia cheerfully explained that she'd missed a step on the stairs because she wasn't paying attention and sprained it, and that her colleague had driven her home. Yoshio told Sakia she should be more careful since she was pretty clumsy, recalling a time in their childhood when she tried to climb a tree like him and took a nasty fall. She shyly asked him not to bring up old stories before they both burst out laughing. Sakia then noticed his work clothes, and Yoshio told her he'd been working at a cleaning company for about a month, thanks to an introduction from his father. He started to feel awkward about starting work at his age, but she cut him off, saying that it didn't matter. She had always been rooting for him. Yoshio was surprised but thanked her, suddenly noticing she was blushing. He apologized for keeping her talking and suggested she go inside. Even so, Sakia said she was really happy they were able to talk after all these years, thanked him, and said goodbye before heading inside. As he turned to leave, Yoshio felt the conversation had gone pretty smoothly, especially since it was their first time talking in 10 years. He was glad to see his close friend hadn't changed at all and walked home happily. However, his self-deprecating thoughts started to creep back in. He began to think that maybe she was just lowering herself to talk to him. It had been 10 years since she'd entered the adult world, gone through her own ups and downs, and become a mature woman. Meanwhile, Yoshio had just started working, and the gap between them seemed impossible to close. As he was hanging his head in shame, Sekia suddenly appeared from her doorway and called his name. Yoshio immediately turned and answered, as she shyly blushed and told him about a new cake cafe that had opened in front of the station. She said that since the cafe attracted a lot of young customers, she was hesitant to go alone, so she wanted to go with him after her leg healed. Surprised, Yoshio agreed, saying he also liked sweets. Sakuya thanked him and said she would email him later. As he continued home, Yoshio wondered if this outing with Sakuya was a date, but he dismissed the thought, telling himself she was just asking him to be an escort. He wondered why she had chosen him, then shook his head, thinking he shouldn't get too worked up when Sayuki's stalker issue was still unresolved. When he entered the kitchen, his mother welcomed him home and noticed the slightly unsettling smile on his face. A few days later, Yoshio was enjoying his day off, ready to game to his heart's content. There had been no sign of Sayuki's stalker since the convenience store incident. Maybe she had just imagined it. Besides, next Sunday he was going with Seika to the cake cafe, which was definitely not a date. He also needed to figure out how to deal with the evil god's next temptation. The last battle had proven the golem's immense power, but with its severe limitations, he could only activate it as a last resort. Worried about having to rely on Gams as the village's sole military force, Yoshio considered using some destiny points to add more warriors and wondered which miracle would be best. Suddenly, Gams looked down in surprise to see Mulis approaching the village, excitedly welcoming the doctor. Yoshio thought it would be perfect if Mulis joined the villagers, but he was still hesitant. The other villagers immediately rushed out of the cave to welcome their friend back, with Carol throwing her arms around the doctor. Lowering his gaze, Mulis expressed his joy at seeing everyone was safe and apologized for running away alone. Layla interrupted him, pointing out that he had only stayed with them out of kindness and that while they were grateful, they couldn't ask for more. Lotus agreed with his wife, happy that they could see each other again, while Kem saw it as a sign from the god of destiny. Watching this scene, Yoshio smiled, realizing a special feature of the game was that there were no village characters the player could hate. Gams thanked Mulis for secretly supporting them from the shadows, and Yoshio figured that if he had noticed Mulis's presence, the warrior must have too. Keeping his head bowed, Mulis said that was all he could contribute and apologized again. Kneeling on one knee, he declared that he had no right to ask for anything, but he still begged for everyone's help. Gams, concerned, told him to raise his head, recalling how he had helped them when Gams was poisoned, and said that if he needed anything, he shouldn't hesitate to ask. Her brother confirmed it, saying that kindness should be repaid. Mulis then apologized once more before brushing his hair back to reveal pointed ears. He revealed that his true identity was not a doctor who had suddenly appeared in their camp, but a member of a race living in the Forbidden Forest, who had been observing them since they entered the forest. Everyone was shocked by this revelation, and Yoshio realized with a tense voice that Mulis was an elf. With a cold gaze, Kem asked Mulis if he had known in advance about the danger of the evil god's temptation in the forest. This was understandable to Yoshio, considering her beloved brother had suffered greatly in the attack. Gams signaled for her to calm down, and Mulis apologized again, saying he'd had a premonition of danger, but that attack felt systematically organized, and the monster's actions had also been strange. Gams had noted that in the two previous attacks as well, including the one that destroyed their village. Although monsters were usually ferocious during the evil god's temptation, they had never been able to organize such coordinated attacks. Lotus added that he had never heard of a village attack during his time as a nomadic merchant. Putting that aside, Gams asked Mulis what he wanted. Looking up, Mulis revealed that his village had been annihilated by the evil god's temptation, leaving everyone, including Yoshio, stunned. Mulis said that his people had lived in the forest for generations. They should have been prepared and known how to fight off monster attacks, yet they were still crushed. He recounted that a dying villager had described it as a massive attack, unlike anything he had ever seen, and it seemed that many different types of monsters had attacked together in what appeared to be a well-coordinated assault. Gams asked Mulis if there were any other survivors, but he confirmed that the witness had also passed away soon after, and the entire village had been completely wiped out. However, he noticed that the number of bodies didn't match the number of villagers, and in particular, the bodies of several children were missing. He hoped that perhaps the children had been taken to a monster nest. Yoshio couldn't imagine the pain and sorrow Mulis must have felt, seeing the village where he was born and raised destroyed, and then having to count the villagers' bodies as the sole survivor. Kem gently comforted the grieving elf, while Gams declared that if there was hope the children were alive, then worrying was just a waste of time. He urged Mulis to lead them there. Kem quickly went inside to get her weapon, while Lotus, Layla, and Carol prepared supplies for the journey. Gams reassured the grateful Mulis, and, seeing this, Yoshio couldn't help but feel proud of his villagers. Everyone had decided to help, so he wouldn't stop them. Although he also wanted to do something for Mulis with the ability to only summon an oracle once a day, he planned to save it for when it was truly needed. Yoshio wondered if there was anything else he could do. Even if he activated the golem, his destiny points would run out before it reached its destination. He briefly considered asking Gams to carry the golem statue, but quickly dismissed the idea as it would slow them down. Gams then set out with Mulis, telling everyone else to stay in the cave. But Kem insisted on going with them, saying she needed to be there to treat any injured children. Her brother objected, saying it could be very dangerous, but the priestess replied that she was fully aware of that, and that they had divine protection from the god of fate, especially if she brought the holy book. Yoshio could have given guidance through prophecies, but he decided to let Gams make his own decision. Gams repeated his concern about bringing his little sister, but also admitted it would be pointless to try and stop her. Carol then approached Gams, giving him a memento to remember her by. When he opened his palm, he saw it was a small wooden statue of the god of fate. Kem said goodbye to the villagers as the search party set off, while Lotus and his family enthusiastically declared they would take care of the cave and prepare food for their return. With everything ready, the group began their journey. They advanced through the forest under a clear blue sky, and Mulis had already pinpointed the location of the monster nest. It seemed it wouldn't take long to get there, but Yoshio still felt uneasy watching things unfold, without being able to intervene. The group continued through the undergrowth, climbing over obstacles with great teamwork, and finally reached a clearing by the bank of a rushing stream. Mulis suggested they rest here. As she sat down, Kem eagerly drank from her water pouch. Yoshio realized that over an hour had passed since they left the village, and he thought to himself that this path might be a bit difficult for Kem. Mulis told Gams that he wasn't sure how many monsters were left at the enemy base, but noted that there were countless monster corpses scattered about, alongside the bodies of the villagers. He believed that in the final battle, his comrades had managed to push back many of the enemies and reduce their numbers. Gams added that there probably weren't many uninjured monsters left. The elf then explained that, of the three main types of monsters in the forest, the ferocious boars and black dogs didn't have a habit of bringing their prey back alive. Therefore, it was logical to assume this was the work of the green goblins. He suggested they continue their journey. Hearing the word prey, Yoshio, who had been thinking of this situation as a hostage rescue, suddenly wondered if the children were safe. He realized that in this incredibly realistic game, it wouldn't be strange for a cruel scene to appear after such a long time. Mulis raised his hand, signaling for everyone to stop, and put a finger to his lips for silence. The group crouched down and moved to the edge of a cliff, where they saw the monster nest below. The nest consisted of many straw huts, and Yoshio could immediately see 9 green goblins. He remarked that regardless of Gams's and Mulis's strength, facing so many enemies at once was very dangerous. The elf said that if the sky weren't so clear, they could have approached stealthily and attacked their opponents. Yoshio agreed that the nice weather was not suitable for a surprise attack, and thought it would be great if he could make it rain. Remembering that he could use the scroll wheel, he opened the Miracles tab and went to the weather control section, enthusiastically declaring that the rain would hide their footsteps and obscure visibility, helping the group attack the monsters in their huts. The god of fate looked through the various weather options and noticed that the number of fate points required changed depending on the choice. He scratched his head, wondering if he should use a downpour, regretting not having tested the weather control at least once. As he selected the miracle, he realized the player could specify the area for the weather control by moving a circle on the screen and adjusting its radius by scrolling. He believed that the larger the radius, the more fate points it would consume. When he clicked, the miracle was activated, and a torrential downpour began to fall on the village and the surrounding area. As expected, the green goblins hurried to take shelter in their huts. Mulis remarked that the change in weather was quite fortunate, but Kem excitedly declared that in that moment, the holy book seemed to glow faintly, speculating that this might be help from the god of fate. With the rain pouring down everywhere, Gams figured they could ambush the goblin settlement now. He handed his extra gear to Kem to move as lightly as possible, and his little sister pleaded with him to be careful. Gams left with only his dagger, and Mulus followed suit. The two split up as they entered the camp, stepping through puddles of water. Gams reached the nearest hut and crouched down beside the entrance. Pausing for a moment, he closed his eyes, then steeled himself and entered the hut with his dagger in hand. A monster's scream echoed for a moment before falling silent forever. Gams emerged from the hut covered in blood with a grim expression on his face. Seeing Mulus come out of another hut, he asked if he had found the children, and when the answer was no, they decided to press on. While the slaughter continued, Yoshio noted that they had succeeded in remaining undetected, and all that was left was to find and rescue the children. As the rain subsided over the silent village, the two confirmed they hadn't found the children. They turned their attention to an unexplored cave. Gams went first, but as soon as he reached the cave entrance, he leaped back in horror and drew his sword. Kem wondered what was happening, but Mulus immediately told her to get back. A giant red cyclops emerged from the cave, wielding a massive club. As the monster stared him down, Gams was shocked to see such a ferocious creature in this place. The cyclops quickly swung its club, landing a direct hit that sent Gams flying. Mulus, Kem, and Yoshio watched in horror, but luckily Gams had managed to draw his sword in time, and the blade took the brunt of the blow. Gams did a backflip and landed firmly in his fighting stance. Facing the charging monster, his eyes filled with cold determination. Mulus shot an arrow straight at the cyclops' eye, but the monster's reflexes proved superior as it easily swatted the arrow aside with its hand. Yoshio was just as astonished as the elf to see the monster deflect the arrow so easily, wondering aloud just how tough the creature's skin must be. An information window popped up, providing details on the red cyclops. Although part of the goblin family, they are a wild and ferocious species, often on bad terms with green goblins due to their superior physical abilities. Ordinary hunters are no match for them, and this monster enjoys feasting on human flesh. The cyclops let out a terrifying roar as Gams and Mulus prepared to face it head-on. Seeing the odds tipping in the monster's favor, Yoshio panicked, wondering if the two warriors could possibly defeat such a beast.